Thank you. Thanks, Michael. Okay, I would remind you to turn your phones off. Well, actually, if you're tethering to a computer, I would advise you not to turn your phones off. Just turn it on to silent, if that's okay. We do have quorum, Clerk, and I'm going to call the meeting to order. I'm going to advise those in the public gallery that they are welcome to use mobile devices as long as they are in airplane mode and all devices are muted. It's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. I'm going to ask for declarations of interest. Members, are there any new interests to declare, not declared at our first meeting, that are relevant to any matters under discussion this week? Declan?
Yeah, Chair. Some of the executor of a small farm in County Tyrone and
Brilliant. Thank you for that, and that will be noted. Thank you, Declan. Are there any apologies that you're aware of, Clerk? None at this stage. Okay. Agenda item 2, Chairperson's business. Members, I refer you to correspondence dated the 31st of January, pages 5 to 6 of the pack from Insert, a glass container manufacturer and bottler headquartered in Derrylin, Fermanagh, which employs over 2,000 people, with 540 people employed in Derrylin alone. They state that their ambition is to almost halve their Scope 1 emissions by 2030 and reach a full net zero position by 2045. Insert wishes to highlight to us a new industrial fuel switching project they're delivering in partnership with Glass Futures. The trial will take place this month in Derrylin using 100% low-grade waste-derived biofuel in place of natural gas for the production of commercial container glass products. Members, as you're aware, Insert are already on our list of agreed potential visits and briefings, and we're aiming to get to visit the site in 2025. Yeah, it sounds like a big window, but we know how fast the clock is ticking. And given this field that they're now moving into, I think it would be, I'd like to see that sooner rather than later, if members are minded. Yeah? Content with. Thank you, members. Item number 2, refer you to page 7 of the pack to the invitation from the Right Honourable Alistair Carmichael MP, Chair of the House of Commons Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee, to an online meeting between committee chairs and conveners to discuss inter-legislature engagement and shared policy areas. At our meeting on the 14th of November, the committee considered correspondence from the Right Honourable Mr Alistair Carmichael MP, highlighting that one of his priorities is to promote greater engagement with the devolved legislatures. At that meeting, we agreed to write to him to support this inter-legislature engagement. Members, have you any comments, or are you content that I attend the online meeting and report back to the committee? Yep, thank you, members. Item number 3, I refer you to the report, pages 8 to 43 of the pack, dated the 4th of February, from the Northern Ireland Rural Valuers Association, the Professional Association for Agricultural and Rural Valuers in Northern Ireland. The report is entitled Initial Assessment of the Values and Numbers of Farm Businesses and Taxpayers in Northern Ireland Affected by the Proposed Changes to Agricultural Property Relief and Business Property Relief from the Inheritance Tax. Members, NERVA provides advice to farmers, landowners and others on a range of issues, including valuation of land and rural properties for all purposes, including taxation and lending. The report provides an analysis of how the proposed inheritance tax changes will adversely and disproportionately affect Northern Ireland farmers, and that the UK Government has underestimated the number of farmers that will be affected here. Members, the report states that findings from DAERA's analysis showed that over 48% of farms here exceed the £1 million threshold. That is over 12,500 farms, which is equivalent to 17% of the total UK farms. Taken over a 30-year period, that would be 420 farms in Northern Ireland potentially to be affected every year. The report also states that by meeting the tax burden, farmers will have limited opportunities for expansion and modernisation, and this will hamper the drive towards increasing sustainability and adapting to climate change. In addition, the forced sales of assets will make some farms unviable, and there was a really useful debate this week in that space, and the Minister absolutely agreed with the motion, so it was a useful debate. Any other comments to make on that one, guys? Okay, thank you very much, members. Item number 4. For your information, in my capacity as an MLA, I have agreed to sponsor an event at Parliament Buildings in June for advancing the bioeconomy in the food sector, led by the UK Research and Innovation Agri-Food for Net Zero Network, which seeks to support policymakers in driving transformative change within the bioeconomy, particularly in the food sector. This innovative focus on innovative approaches to 1, advancing circular economy principles, 2, improving access to affordable sustainable food, 3, supporting farmers in adopting sustainable practices, 4, reducing the carbon footprint of food through supply chain optimisation, 5, minimising edible food waste, and this is the first time I've said this word, valorising inedible food waste, and 6, enhancing regional sustainability. The event will showcase these efforts with case studies, panel discussions and opportunities for stakeholder collaboration. and I have asked a number of you to co-sponsor that with me, so it should be a useful event, and I'd encourage you to keep an eye out for it. Item number 5, members, I refer you to the matter of the Waste Materials Facility Regulations Northern Ireland 2025 at our meeting on the 12th of September we considered, and we were content to note correspondence from DAERA regarding its consultation on draft legislation and a draft code of practice for material facility sites in Northern Ireland. The committee noted that the MF sites are not currently defined in Northern Ireland legislation, but are specialised plants or part of a plant that receives separates and prepares recyclable material for end markets and for further processing. The code and legislation will provide a detailed definition of what an MF is and how operators will know if the code is applicable to them. In Northern Ireland, there are currently no statutory sampling requirements for MFs, unlike the rest of the UK. The sampling is required for upcoming UK-wide reforms around enhanced producer responsibility, otherwise known as EPR, and UK parity in waste management. We then considered a written briefing on the 23rd of January regarding the departmental response to that consultation. The briefing highlighted that Northern Ireland legislation and sampling processes are behind that of England, Scotland and Wales, and that aligning with their most recent changes through the code will provide UK parity. The committee noted that legislation is required to implement the code in Northern Ireland. Specifically, it is intended to amend the Waste Management Licensing Regulations Northern Ireland 2003 and the Pollution Prevention and Control Industrial Emission Regulations Northern Ireland 2013 to define the MF and place an obligation on any MF who holds a waste licence to permit to comply with the code. The committee agreed to request an oral briefing from the departmental officials when the SL1 was received. However, due to an oversight, the department then omitted to submit a formal SL1 letter to the committee before laying the SR in the business office on the 6th of February. The SR is subject to negative resolution procedure, and the end of the statutory period has been calculated as the 11th of March 2025. The clerk has requested the submission of the appropriate SL1 letter to the committee. However, this means that we are in the position of having to consider the SL1 and the SR when the SR has already been led by negative resolution. I don't recall any members having any specific issues with the policy when we did receive the written briefing, so I'm seeking agreement in that instance that we get an oral briefing as soon as possible on the content of the SL1 and also consider the SR at the same meeting. I will point out that it's far from ideal, but the department has apologised for the oversight. Have members any matters they want to raise in regard to this one?
We already have a briefing on this?
So we had a briefing, we just haven't had the SL1, so we're going to get the SL1 with the SR. Which just,
we had a written briefing.
Yeah, there's a written briefing, yeah. Yeah, but there's no matters raised, to be fair, when we first discussed it.
Do we need another briefing then?
It's up to the committee to request it, and if the department then can or can't do it, then we're in their hands.
This is the one that the stakeholders have written saying their content?
No. This is a waste management regulation. Yeah, and this was discussed, and there was no points raised at this one.
This is Chair. This is materials facilities.
Yeah, this is one brings us in the line with Scotland, England, and Wales in terms of complying with the regulations. So we don't have a code of regulations with regard to the MF. So yeah, it's my recollection is pretty straightforward. If we're content. Yep.
Chair, we've just been routinely getting briefings on the SL1, so that's why I requested that. But if the committee are content not to, we can just take it all.
Yeah, it's negative resolution, so there's a chance in plenary too.
No, Chair, not unless it's prayed against.
Oh, okay. No issues?
So what our plan is to have a briefing?
So we can seek a briefing with the Minister and bring it forward. Anyway,
it is already laid in the business office, and the normal routine would be that we would get an SL1 letter, and that's where we would get our briefing, Chair, from the officials, and then that's when the committee has their opportunity to comment on it, and then we get the SR after that. But the SR, Chair, has been laid before we saw before we saw the SL1. So I think there was some confusion maybe with Chair with just inexperienced staff out in the department. That's as far as I can get. So that's not getting that. But.
I suppose it's not particularly about that issue. I suppose it's just about the issue around process and the fact that the committee isn't being given its place and certainly not given advance notice and sufficient briefing in advance of all of these things. Therefore, we've got confusion, and it's unfortunate, obviously. yourself, Clark, can call on that as well. So I think that message still needs to go back to the department just with regards to this.
Yeah, happy to do that.
Chair, I think it's back to the same situation that has been raised numerous times in this committee, where the character's really been put before the horse here, and really we're getting stuff put to us, but we haven't had a chance to consult on. And I think that's where the problem is. You know, the department and the minister's got to get that message. They have to consult with the committee first, and then put the issues forward then.
No, I absolutely don't disagree. I mean, we did look at this on the 23rd of January. Obviously, we didn't get a chance to do any further consultation. That's that point's well made. I think there's certainly something that needs to happen in the department here in terms of sharpening up, in terms of giving us the time and the space to do it, given that there are significantly complex pieces that we are having to turn our attention to.
Chair, just in relation to that SL and the SR, how much time have we to work with? For example, if there was issues raised with the SL, possibly to ask the department to make amendments before the SR is laid. How long would that take?
This SR is already.
It's already laid, so this is.
There's been an error just in the process. Yeah.
I don't think there's not an actual. There's no definitive guide as to what good practice or best practice is here. Obviously, the amount of time between them is useful because if you want to do a stakeholder piece, but there's nothing definitively written down. That I'm aware of.
There will. The Assembly is working towards a new process and protocol with the department on these matters, and I would envisage, from what I've heard, that it'll be autumn time maybe before that's fully in place, whereby there would be a more definitive space between SL1s and SRs. But this is an error. The SR has been laid. We received a written briefing and there was confusion in that area in the department that I'm not aware of what happened, except that it was human error or, misunderstanding, that we should have got a formal SL1 letter, and that was our first, our formal first opportunity.
So we read the written briefing on the 23rd of January and the SR was laid on the 6th of February, so there was, so it's not that the SR was laid before we got a written briefing. We did have a written briefing, we just didn't get the other relevant space. John?
Yeah, Chair, can I just double check where this is in the pack? I'm not, hence my
it's
original confusion there.
Sandra,
page.
No, we don't, Chair, sorry, we don't have, the SR is not,
in
the pack.
Because we don't have it.
Because I just need, Chair, I'm seeking agreement as to how we would handle it. Yeah.
So we'll be obviously. So we've two things to decide here. We obviously will be writing a letter to express the committee's discomfort with the fact that it is stone put at the cart before the horse. And then the only other question then is, are you content to take them together, or not? SL1, the SR.
Do you have any other choice, Chair?
Well, I think we're back in the position again. If the committee decided to say that they weren't content, then the minister would have a decision to make whether he moved it or not. Would that be fair?
It's already,
It's laid. I know it's laid, but
so the only thing that can happen is someone praying against it, either a committee or a member, or I suppose the minister is up. Remove anything.
As I said, the minister doesn't have to move it. Any other thoughts on this one, guys? Okay, I'm just going to ask a question. Okay, as I said, it's far from ideal. We will reflect that in our communication with the Minister. Are you content that we respond to the SR when the Minister moves it as per the papers, or is there any other action the committee wants to take in this regard? William, do you indicate?
I'm okay at the moment.
Okay.
Chair, I think probably the best option then is that we do get a briefing on it and have the SR on the same day. Yeah.
Okay, we'll communicate that to the Department Minister. Happy enough, members? Thank you very much. Okay. Then item 3, minutes of the February meeting.
Got that, okay.
February 2nd? You got it? Yes.
Yeah, got that, okay.
That's on pages 45 to 59. Have you any comments, or are you content with the minutes as drafted? If so, we'll then sign them and they'll be published on the website. Yep. Thank you, members. Okay, matters arising. refer to the response from the Department dated 7th of February, page 61 to 64 of the pack regarding the Animal Identification Records Movements and Enforcement Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2025. Following the departmental oral briefing at our meeting on the 23rd of January, we inquired how many potential offenders were identified each year since the enforcement powers ceased but were unable to be inspected in the absence of those powers. The Department states that the number of cases referred to the Department's Welfare Enforcement Branch, which included an allegation of livestock IRM-related infringements where investigation could not proceed, are as follows. In 2021, there were 11 cases, 2022, 12 cases, 23, 9 cases, 2024, 11 cases, and in 2025, 3 cases to date. Members, the Department states it is not possible to retrospectively pursue cases for enforcement. However, it is considering what action should be taken in relation to these cases. For example, whether targeted investigations should be carried out to establish if there are any ongoing non-compliance issues. Members, the committee also sought clarification on whether those alleged cases of IRM infringements would have been referred for cross-compliance checks. The response states that 75% of cross-compliance checks are selected on the basis of a risk matrix and the remaining 25% are at random. The Department states it would not have been appropriate to adjust the agreed risk matrix in order to specifically target some herds or cross-compliance inspections due to notification of possible contraventions of the IRM legislation. Nevertheless, the Department states that most of these cases have been captured for the risk-based cross-compliance checks. Are members content with the correspondence and the answers so far? Yep. Thank you, members. Number 2, I refer you to email correspondence dated the 10th of February, page 65 to 86 of the papers. This is the chain of correspondence between Aquaculture NI and a committee member that was agreed to be shared with all members following the briefing from Aquaculture NI at our most recent meeting. Are there any points that you want to make? Are you content to note? Thank you. Number 3, I refer you to response from the Minister dated 11th of February at pages 4 to 6 of the table of papers regarding fair pricing food supply chain. The committee previously wrote to the Minister following consideration of correspondence from the DEFRA Minister of State on measures to improve fair pricing in the food supply chain. We considered the Minister's response to that letter of our meeting on the 30th of January and wrote back to the Minister further inquiring what specific asks has the Department made for Northern Ireland in the forthcoming fair dealing regulations. What specific supply chain issues did the Minister raise at the UK Interministerial Group meeting in November? And what actions the committee could potentially take to proactively support the Minister in regards to ensuring these regulations meet Northern Ireland needs? Members, this response feeds into our bank of due diligence work on issues raised by Farmers for Action. To draw these matters to committee's conclusion, in the first instance, I propose we arrange an informal session with RAISE to discuss the information we have received from FFA, from DEFRA and the Minister, so we are clear on the likely impacts of the DEFRA proposals on the concerns that have already been raised. Members content to note and follow that course of action as outlined? Thank you, members.
Yeah.
Okay. Item number 4, we have discussed the rural impact of the recent storm on a number of occasions with the role of NIE, Forestry Service and Fibrous all being discussed over the last number of meetings. We agreed last week that the Clerk would speak to the Clerk for the Economy Committee regarding what the committee was doing in this regard. The Clerk to the Economy Committee understands that Fibrous has met with each of the parties in recent days and also that the response to Assembly questions AQW 21377 indicates that the Department for Economy will liaise with the utility regulator and NIE Networks after NIE Networks has conducted its post-major incident review for the storm and will respond to any learnings or requests coming from that review. The Clerk to the Economy Committee will discuss with his chair the potential for any ERA economy link-up on these matters. Members, any points you want to make on that? Are you content to note at this stage? And the Clerk will liaise with the Clerk from the Economy in the meantime and then come back?
Yeah.
Yep. I think it's good that we do allow Fibrous and NIE to do that post-incident review and take their learns. Okay, agenda item 5, oral briefings from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. That is the update on the new farm sustainability standards and penalty regime. So we're going to refer members to pages 88 to 140 of the pack for the briefing paper from the Department. That is the farm sustainability standards and revised penalty matrix. Members, the purpose of the briefing is to update the committee on the current position of the draft farm standards FSS and revised penalty matrix, which has been developed as part of the Sustainable Agriculture Programme. The FSS is to replace the system of cross-compliance, which has existed in Northern Ireland since 2005. I welcome the following DERA officials to brief the committee on the report. Yeah, okay, we should have Dr. Jason Foy, who's the Director of Area Based Schemes Division, Mr. Aidan McAvoy, Head of Controls and Assurance Development Advance, Dr. Elvira McAleese, Divisional Veterinary Officer, and Mr. Mark Hammond, Head of Natural Environment Operations at NIEA. And as soon as you're comfortable, just take checking to as soon as you're comfortable, please do feel free to begin your briefing.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to brief the committee this morning on farm sustainability standards. In our written briefing, we've set out the background and nature of this policy. Our objective this morning is to brief you on the policy itself, to answer your questions and to listen to your views. In December 2021, the Department launched a public consultation on the future agricultural policy proposals for Northern Ireland. One of the proposals within that consultation was to replace the current cross-compliance regime with a new and simplified system of farm sustainability standards. The proposal was designed according to three principles. Firstly, to undertake a managed phasing out of the statutory management requirements under cross-compliance towards a reliance on the original legislation for enforcement, except where there is a very good reason to retain the status quo. Secondly, to develop a flexible and responsive replacement for the good agricultural and environmental condition standards that meet current and emerging environmental issues. And thirdly, building in proportionality and responsiveness to the penalty system with a much greater emphasis on securing compliance without recourse to penalty. 80% of respondents to the consultation agreed that the current regime should be replaced with farm sustainability standards. Over a number of years, there has been widespread dissatisfaction with cross-compliance. Some stakeholders view the standards as complicated, with penalties too severe. Others view the regime as ineffective, with penalties not being severe enough. Farm sustainability standards form a key part of the Sustainable Agriculture Programme. They seek to advance the programme's four strategic objectives, which are improved environmental sustainability, enhanced productivity, stronger resilience, and an effective functioning supply chain. In developing the policy, we have returned to first principles. Farmers in receipt of public subsidy should observe a set of minimum standards. The standards seek to protect the environment as well as public and animal health and welfare. They encourage responsible stewardship and seek to deter damage and fair practice. The standards should be as straightforward as possible to understand and comply with. Our rule of thumb has been that a farmer taking reasonable care should have little difficulty in meeting the standards. The current draft of the standards, together with their underpinning requirements, has been included in the written briefing provided to you. The standards are a minimum and therefore they're not intended to be excessive or onerous. This should be business as usual for all farmers. We propose to replace the 20 cross-compliance standards with 7 farm sustainability standards as follows. So FSS1 is protection of waters from pollution. Standard 2, protection of habitats and biodiversity. Standard 3, protection of landscape, archaeological and heritage features. Standard 4, the protection of soils. Standard 5, food, feed, herd and flock health and biosecurity. Standard 6 is the welfare and protection of farmed livestock, including transport. And Standard 7 is livestock identification and traceability. As this area of policy is fully devolved to Northern Ireland, there is an opportunity to move away from the current EU legacy regime and develop a system suited to the needs and circumstances of Northern Ireland. This is a starting point. The standards can change in response to the evidence. There will be opportunities to review their operation and their impact and adjust them accordingly. And all of this will be driven by evidence. One of the key objectives of farm sustainability standards is to protect the environment and public health and animal health and welfare. This is to be achieved by farmers understanding the reason for each of the standards and having the ability to meet them. The policy seeks to support, enable and help farmers comply with the standards rather than seeing financial penalty as the first and only response. This represents a significant change in approach. Whilst the draft penalty matrix has been included in the briefing, I would like to set it in a bit of context. It's been recognised throughout the process that penalties are not the only answer. The cross-compliance regime has a heavy emphasis on penalties, and this is shown not to be effective enough. There will be much greater emphasis on knowledge, guidance and information for farmers in the new regime. We wish to help farmers comply with the standards and recognise that the vast majority of farmers already do. There's a place for financial penalties, but the policy seeks to change behaviour. Part of this change in behaviour is deterrence, but just as much, if not more, is about support. We have consulted extensively with our agricultural policy stakeholder group, which includes the Ulster Farmers Union, the British Veterinary Association, and a range of environmental groups, including Northern Ireland Environment Link. Stakeholders have welcomed the simplicity of the proposals and asked a number of questions of clarification on the standards, which we have answered. The emphasis on information, advice and support for farmers was particularly welcomed by all stakeholders. There was also a broad welcome for our objective that the penalty regime would be fairer and more proportionate. Of course, there's a wide variety of opinions on the definition of fair. The proposed penalty matrix is simpler, so we have removed the complexity of the current regime by discarding factors such as permanence, on-farm, off-farm extent, and the intentional negligence factor. The matrix operates purely on the supreme breach. More severe breaches attract higher penalties, and there is more proportion in the levels of severity. For first-time breaches, we have introduced a guidance letter and mandatory training course component to the penalty, as we wish to prevent further breaches and help farmers avoid them occurring in the first place. The Minister has not made final decisions on the standards or the penalty matrix, and we welcome the Committee's views on the subject. So, Mr Chairman, that concludes my summary of the topic, so my colleagues and I would be happy to answer any questions the Committee may have.
Thank you so much, and should have welcomed you to this lovely location where we are. So I'm sure you're probably looking out the window beyond my head at what's happening outside there. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of to and fro with the committee today, because I know there's a keen interest in regard to this policy. We have had a considerable amount of discussion in recent weeks about cross-compliance, and I don't think that any committee member would disagree with the overall policy objective of making any new penalty system effective and fair, with a greater emphasis on securing compliance rather than the application of penalties. And that's certainly good that you've set that out early. I'm going to ask probably what sounds a bit like a daft question, but I don't think it's daft. I'd be grateful for the record if you explain why regulations we recently prayed against in the Assembly on cross-compliance were needed, given this new system that's being proposed now.
That was a decision taken by the Minister,
Okay.
who was quite clear with us in his instructions to us that he wanted those changes reversed, and was fully aware that we had intended to replace the system of cross-compliance from 2026 in any case.
Okay, so there's no operational rationale for it, really. It's just it was seeking to amend what was the existing one in advance of this happening anyway. So there's the time difference I'm trying to establish here probably
Yes.
is, it wouldn't be great.
Well,
it wouldn't be significant.
The change that the Minister had proposed would, if farm sustainability standards had been adopted in 2026, they would have only been in operation for 1 year.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. See that the papers refer to concerns that have been made by the APSG being taken in terms of the broader context for deterrence without disproportionate impact. That's where many of the committee members have expressed concerns in discussion about this SR. Would please go over the main concerns that were expressed by the APSG, and we have received a letter from them to say that the stakeholders, they are content by the way, but we don't have the necessarily the drill down detail of any significant concerns that group identified, and any that are maybe outstanding.
Well, there are questions of clarification around the what some of the standards, wording in some of the standards meant at quite a technical detail level, so we have answered those. The main concerns, I think, expressed by different partners in APSG was around how we would arrive at a system of penalty where the balance is right across the different levels of severity. And also when we're bearing in mind that farm businesses receive very different levels of payment from the department, so it's a question of fairness in terms of and honestly held views made very cogently by members of APSG around, is it fair, for example, for farmers receiving committing the same breach of the standards to receive in financial terms very different penalties, but that is on the basis of the fact that those farm businesses receive different levels of payment to begin with. Yeah. So you could express the penalties as a percentage of the payment, or as a fixed rate for a breach, but then you have a disproportionate impact on small farmers then if you have a fixed monetary level. So there, like I say, Chair, there are good faith arguments to be made on either side of this, and we certainly heard a lot of that from APSG, but I think we came to a reasonable consensus that we're trying to apply a system that retains public confidence, but also does account for the fact that farmers do receive very different levels of payment from the department.
No problem. It does, the matrix does look, it looks still quite complicated to me, but I do accept that the rationale is perhaps a more fairer look at the proportionality of it. There's an operational one, if you don't mind me just looking into. So, in and around the farmers must ensure that all organic matter and livestock, manure stores, etc., are managed and constructed well. One of the points is that farmers must ensure that total livestock storage in farm is sufficient for at least 22 weeks and 26 weeks for pigs and poultry. But there's also a restriction in the height that you can stack bales up to 2. And if the so that's a change in terms of you can only stack to 2, I think, in terms of the bales for silage and so on. But if they're being asked to store more, is that pose an operational difficulty for particularly small farms?
I'll bring in one of my colleagues, Ethan or Mark. Can you comment on that question?
It's certainly something, if there's concerns about, we'll look at. At the minute we haven't fixed what is set, the standards that we're developing aren't set in stone. We're actually in the process of looking at them and considering any issues like that have arisen. So certainly I can take that back and we can certainly have a look at that issue to make sure that it's fully considered and addressed whenever we're going to present the final standards.
I'd appreciate it. It sounds very simplistic, but it's something I know, particularly where I am. I know, because I would visit some of the farms and I know how they stack and I know the limitations that they have. And it would be, things like that would certainly seem to be unfair. I've got one final one, and then I have Declan, William, Michelle and John so far, and Patsy, I think, indicated there. My last one then is, it is good that the operation of the standards and penalty remakes will be monitored and reviewed and can be conducted after sufficient data has been gathered. Now, how long after the implementation will a review be conducted, and will the detail of the review be included in the regulation?
That still has to be decided in terms of whether we would put in regulation a mandate for a review. The farm sustainability standards, like cross compliance, would operate on an annual cycle. So we would have an initial review after the first year of operation, and establish whether there are any improvements or changes that we need to make as a result of our findings in the first year of control and inspection.
Thank you so much. Declan?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much for your presentation. In terms of the matrix, obviously we've been provided information on the 21, 22, 23 as an annex to give our pack, but obviously we haven't seen the new system that you're using, and it's very difficult and I very welcome the fact that you are saying that the new system will be fair and more proportionate, but it's very difficult for us as a committee to assess that when we haven't seen it.
Yeah, at the moment we are undertaking work to establish across all of the standards which breaches would constitute a low severity, a medium severity, a high severity, etc. So there's a bit of work to be done to fully complete that exercise. It's quite difficult to compare the current cross-compliance penalty regime to what we're proposing because they are quite different. We have removed, as I said earlier, the factor around intentionality and negligence, which does make a big difference to penalties currently, as the committee have discussed before. So it's quite difficult to then translate like-for-like breaches across the two different matrices. But in general terms, we have taken steps to ensure that the penalties are, in terms of how they're going to be applied, are more proportionate across the different standards, with less, if you might want to call them cliff events, where someone will go over a certain threshold and automatically the penalty is ramped up significantly. We're going to try and smooth that out through the matrix as much as we possibly can.
Chair, just secondly, and many of us around the table will have received representation from farmers who have maybe made a minor mistake in terms of ticking the wrong box on an application form or something like that there, and they've been forced into an appeals process when very clearly it was administrative error or a minor error on their part. Will there be any proportionate or fair system whereby those situations that are very clearly and demonstrably a desk-based human error, that they can be addressed before farmers are forced down the road of having to go into the lengthy appeals process?
Those types of errors resulting in penalties generally are not due to cross-compliance or farm sustainability standards. They're scheme rules, which are quite different. And absolutely, my staff do look at cases of that nature day and daily, and there are cases that are definitely resolved without having to go through the appeals process where we do see that there is an obvious error that has been made, and there are certain provisions in regulation that allow us to do that. But it's important for us that even with that, with our best efforts in that regard, it's important for farmers still to have that avenue of redress if they're still not satisfied. But that generally doesn't happen with cross-compliance and farm sustainability standard issues.
And you see, in terms of enforcing the new proposed regime, like obviously one of the issues that we played against just recently in the Assembly was around the enforcement regime, and there wasn't a differentiation between what would be considered to be minor breaches and more serious breaches. So how would the issue of, say, capital ear tags was referenced? So how would this new regime be enforced, for example, around ear tags?
The level of enforcement in terms of inspection would be quite similar to what we currently have. However, the way the penalties would work in such circumstances would be quite different. So the issue that the committee had discussed before and the prayer of annulment in the Assembly was around not minor breaches but negligent breaches then becoming automatically intentional. There's no such thing as automatic, as intentional or negligent in this proposal. It is purely about the impact. So in cases such as ear tags, for example, we're looking at that at the moment, but in general terms, the more, for example, the more ear tags that are missing, the more severe that breach is. So there wouldn't be a cliff event, if you like, where if there's only a few missing, it automatically goes into a higher level of penalty. We're trying to make that much more proportionate, and that's why we've introduced 5 levels of severity instead of the current 4, to be able to try and make that differentiation a bit more meaningful and a bit more proportionate for farmers.
Thank you, Declan. William?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the presentation, and you're very welcome. I have some concerns. I think it's good that there's farm sustainability standards. I think it's important that there is standards, and I think people should be held to account if they behave wrongly. But in the old scheme, I've seen in situations where people, for instance, if you buy cattle out of a mart today, they're permanently deferred. You have to confirm those within 7 days. Some people missed out maybe 8th or 9th day before they realised it wasn't a serious offence. But this happened a few times. Successive years meant that there was massive penalties for those farmers for very small breaches, and breaches that, in effect, had no impact. Right? We now have a situation where 100% penalty, high for severity, you will be excluded from the next scheme year. That's a proposal. So that's 200% penalty. Plus, you're excluded from the beef sustainability scheme the next year. As I read it here, that's a 200% penalty, not a 100% penalty.
That would be on the basis that that farm business has breached to a very high level on multiple occasions. and this would be reserved for the worst cases of breaches. And
it's not clear what the multiple occasions mean. It's not clear who makes that decision. If you're brought to a court of law, a judge makes a decision. Who makes a decision whether this is very high or not?
The department.
Department.
The department as the competent control authority. The number of occasions of the breach, again, as we said in the written briefing, is over a 3-year period as it currently operates. So to get into that situation, a farm business would have to have had a very high breach on then 3 occasions in succession within 2 years. Very high level of severity. I'll ask my colleague Dr. McAleese to comment, but I don't envisage that we would have late cattle registrations in that category.
I have seen the past. I've seen those situations happen, and that's why I'd be concerned.
Yes, and that's what we're seeking to try and address, is exactly that point, is to try and avoid that. Our emphasis, again, on guidance and support for farmers, that which we want to try and change culture around this, would be the provision of advice and information to farmers to avoid those situations occurring. So if it's late cattle registration and there's a delay in post, for example, there are alternatives open to farm businesses to avoid that entirely by registering their cattle online or using our telephone service, which negates reliance on post, for example, for cattle registration work. I don't know if you want anything to add.
With regards to the traceability, we are looking at the impact that the actual breach has created. So in the likes of late registrations, we don't envisage that to be a high or very high medium breach. So that's all looked into that. If it was a low or a very low breach, ultimately continuing that will not get into that 100% penalty scenario, but it is included in the breaches. All right.
Do I also read that there's a minimum penalty even for low breaches? Is that right?
There's a financial level of minimum penalty, and this is born of the fact that there are there's quite a vast difference in the level of payments that farm businesses receive from the department. So, for example, taking a very low breach and a 1% penalty that we even have currently under cross compliance can result in farm businesses receiving penalties of less than £20 or less than £10, which I think is ineffective. So we are trying to account for those farm businesses, for the penalties being a sufficient deterrent for farm businesses that happen to receive quite small payments, and a small percentage of a small payment will lead to what some may see as a derisory level of penalty. So we're trying to balance both of those factors.
Okay.
Thank you. Michelle?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for coming to speak with us today. Can I just ask, is this a final paper or is this still policy and development? It's
still policy and development. The Minister will be making final decisions later on, but we did want to have the opportunity to brief the committee on the proposals so far and be able to listen to your views on it.
Okay. And I suppose a simple question really on the back of the question from the Chair. Obviously we did have quite a heated debate in relation to cross-compliance in the Chamber. And I don't know whether I'm worried or concerned, but I suppose I'm conscious that there may be lessons that perhaps should have been learned through that process and whether they will be applied to this, just with regards to
they absolutely are, in the sense that the issue that the committee and the Assembly were concerned about around this automatic movement from one part of a penalty matrix to another, we have effectively designed out of this regime in that there is no such thing as intentional or negligent in this matrix that we're proposing. It is purely around the severity of the breach itself. So we avoid situations where what might be seen as minor breaches suddenly becoming intentional and attracting a much higher penalty than they would otherwise do. That shouldn't happen in this case because we've simplified the matrix.
Okay, and yet it says here, in the new regime, breaches and the associated penalties will be considered at individual farm sustainability standard level and not at environmental, welfare or veterinary levels. This will have the effect of increasing the overall financial impact on farm businesses with multiple breaches. And obviously it removes provision where a farm business can effectively breach standards within one group and not incur an additional financial penalty. So
yes, that would be in the case where a farm business breaches multiple standards at the same time.
At the same time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, you also referenced at the beginning that the consultation took place in December 2021 and 80% of respondents wanted a simplified system, and I appreciate that and understand that. Will what's being proposed here go for consultation as well?
We're not planning on another consultation because we have had a significant level of consultation with the agri-policy stakeholder group, and we have heard a lot of opinion and views there which we think are sufficient to be able to progress the policy.
And I appreciate that, and I know we've heard a lot about this group in the last couple of weeks, but would it not be, given the fact that normally what would happen if we have a significant change in policy, that we'd go out for public consultation, that this wouldn't?
Well, we believe that we've consulted on quite a lot of it already, but again, I do take the point, and it's something we can take away and consider.
I mean, I think my preference obviously would be that it would have a full consultation. That aside, there's also the issue around standards, and there's the NAP review, which has long been in the mix. Can we get an idea as to when that consultation will take place and whether that will have an impact on the standards which are set?
I believe the NAP review is due to be consulted upon later in the spring, is what I've heard, but you may wish to approach the department more centrally about that. The review of the NAP regulations could well have an impact on the standards, as any reviews of policy or legislation in the future could, and the standards can then be adjusted as required, whether that's in 2026 or later on. As this is a fully devolved matter, the department and under ministerial control can adjust these standards in light of emerging needs. So I'd be surprised if the review did not change the standards, although that process has to take its course, and then the standards can be adjusted according to what those final policy decisions are.
Okay, and just finally, is one.
I think on that point, wasn't it? You wanted to.
I was just going to say that the standards that they're developed as they are, and taken into consideration, if this is introduced in 2006, they may be as they are. But if there's issues coming out of the NAP review, then the following year, the standards be amended for the 2027 scheme year.
Yes, these will operate on an annual cycle, so we'd never change them mid-year, so that farmers would have plenty of notice and opportunity to make whatever adjustments or changes they may need to make as a result of the NAP review or any other change in standards.
And just finally, can I just ask about an appeal process?
Yeah, the review of decision process would continue to operate under schemes that have the farm sustainability standards applied to them as it currently does. That will continue as normal.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. John?
Chair, thank you. Chair, moving us away, if I may, from our regular financial focus and the penalty regime attention, and mindful that, reflecting on earlier comments, mindful that 1 year in the absence of a decision to increase or maintain higher penalties can cause a lot of damage, and if anybody needs any proof of that, I'm happy to take them to some of the rivers around South Antrim and show them where complete devastation has been created in the space of an hour or two by non-compliance and deliberate pollution. Can I ask this question? Looking at the new sustainability standards around environmental protection, animal welfare and biosecurity, if there is hope that there will be better outcomes from what is envisaged here, and I for one hope there will be, on what is that hope based? What's the foundation of the hope for better outcomes, assuming that this is intended to lead to better outcomes?
The foundation would be that we see, in terms of our inspections and referrals made to us, that we see fewer breaches. So this is geared towards, this policy is geared towards seeking to prevent breaches in the first place. We can penalise farmers as we have done for the last 20 years, and I know some committee members have expressed the view that that hasn't been terribly effective. The key for us is actually seeing an outcome, an environmental or public health or animal welfare improvement in there, and that for us is reflected initially in fewer breaches being detected on the basis that we're able to provide more information and support to farmers to help them comply in the first place.
Okay. And will there be an analysis done then that the checks have not reduced in the context of seeing fewer breaches, but I want
Yes.
everybody to think that there are fewer checks?
Yes.
So we'll be able to show that the checks have at the very least been maintained or increased,
Yes.
and that breaches of those and repeated breaches, especially repeated breaches of those, have been reduced at the same time.
Yes.
Okay.
Is it UK, John? Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Patsy?
Yeah, thanks very much. Maybe just picking up on that. Can I ask just how many, because those have been awful, some of those I'm involved with a number of people in the Ballandary River, around the Ballandary River Enhancement Scheme, those pollution incidents, how many breaches, or penalties I should say, have been invoked by the department on foot of those breaches in, say, the last, 5 years?
I wouldn't have figures to hand just for that specific area, but maybe across Northern Ireland.
I will, I suppose that applies to all water courses.
Yeah, well, for breaches in 2023, the most recent year where we have figures available, I think we had detected 277 breaches of the current standard on water, protection of waters from pollution. Yeah, 277 in 2023 were detected.
And
that's across Northern Ireland, so I don't have a figure to hand just for.
Those are breaches that subsequently would have followed up with penalties?
Yes.
All right, okay. That's grand. Maybe we could have the previous figures, that would be helpful too, for previous years if you have them.
The equivalent for 2022 was 189, and for 2021, 183.
All right, okay. Does that reflect better detection by NIEA, or what's, do you know?
I'll ask my colleague in NIEA to comment on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think the detection rates in the water side of things are quite good, are quite high. There was probably a dip whenever inspections weren't taking place as much during COVID.
Yeah.
So in the figures that are being presented, there is a bit of a dip, but that's because of the COVID and the inspections were impacted in those 2 years. So then subsequent years after that have obviously increased inspections and therefore increased the number of breaches that have been identified.
And those breaches of those, many of those would have wound up with conviction, of being criminal proceedings.
I think each year approximately between 6 and 12 are usually brought forward to. So that's over the last, from 2019 to 2023, it's ranged from 6 cases being brought to court to 12 cases being brought to court. So it's really not much.
That's grand, thank you for that. Now, if I could just come back then to what you're proposing here today. You mentioned there just earlier, Jason, that there was extensive consultation, and you mentioned that there was a fair bit of response between yourselves, dialogue with the consultees. Could you maybe just outline for me what was the major issue of, we'll call it contention or lack of agreement, or whatever way you want to call it, that still remains outstanding?
I think there probably still is a difference of views amongst stakeholders as to whether the penalty regime that we're proposing is fair. There were questions more than differences of opinion on the standards, and I think most, if not all, of our consultees happy enough with the standards themselves in the sense that they could understand what they were getting at, they could understand some of the detail that sat behind them. The issue that we're probably left with is just a variety of opinions as to what constitutes fairness in the penalty regime.
Then, what about the other issue of the nitrates action programme review and how penalties, how it seems to be, well anyway, I'm sure you're aware of the concern that's been expressed to yourself about that review hasn't concluded yet, and therefore how can we sequentially determine what, we haven't looked at the view around that, how can we sequentially determine what a breach or a penalty may consequentially be as a result of that?
As we've said before, the standards as they sit today we would propose would take effect from 2026. If the NAP review then changes those standards, going through whatever the consultation process that it's going through, the standards will be revised and then implemented from 2027.
I don't expect you to know the answer to this, but have you any idea when your colleagues may have completed that review? And I don't have any indication.
No, that would be being developed by policy.
Yes. It might be helpful if we could get clarification on that, Chair. If that's okay.
I think I might have a question, Mr. Norman, but certainly for the committee, happy to also raise that as an action.
Okay, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Patsy. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, with regards to software design and hardware procurement, you've said that this needs to be in place to allow all this testing and all to be done by January 2026. Yes. Where are you with that? What's the cost going to be? What mitigation measures have you put in place? Should there be any hiccups with this? We've seen this before in the past whenever new software has been put in place. So maybe you could elaborate something on that.
Sure. Well, the software development and design is already underway. Even if aspects of the policy still need to be determined, it doesn't prevent us from starting at least on the basics in terms of the software replacement for the systems that we have around inspection, around the movement of data around the department. We have started on the foundational work with that. There is a challenging timetable for us, without doubt, but we're working through some of the costing information at the moment, so I don't have a figure that I can give you today in terms of what the cost is going to be. It depends what the final policy looks like. But at the moment, we are planning on the basis that we will be ready for this in 2026, and we're taking a number of steps within the programmes we have delivering this to make that happen.
And are you tying in any mitigating measures should there any hiccups arise in this new programme whenever you've gotten wrong? So then that the farmer's not the person that's going to be penalised if something goes wrong?
No, I can assure you that if there are any difficulties in delivery on our side, that is not, that should not be and will not be. The farmer will not suffer any detriment for that. Equally, we will ensure that we are operating the system and processes that underpin it as efficiently as we can. So we're trying to do this in an efficient and an effective way for farmers too. So we will continue to operate the inspection regime on a sample basis. That will continue to be a mixture of risk and random based selections, and we review that annually as we have done over the last number of years.
Okay, thank you for that. You then did talk about first-time breaches and introducing training. Can you elaborate a little more?
Okay. Our intention is that we're exploring options to deliver that training to farmers online if it's convenient. That would be our preference and probably the preference for most farmers, but we understand that there are maybe issues where face-to-face may be more appropriate. Really what we're trying to do with that is avoid farmers making the same breaches year on year and receiving escalating penalties year on year, because that's only ever going to lead to one outcome, and it doesn't fix the problem. And what we're trying to do with this is help the farmer fix it.
One other issue, Chair, when we look at penalties, we look back over the years on penalties, it's normally the farmer who's doing their very best to comply with regulations, and as Declan said earlier, maybe they tick a wrong box or whatever, and they face the full force of the penalty that's coming down on them, and they lose out in single farm payments and percentages of it and so forth. But then you do then have the rogue farmer. There's not many of them, but there's some about, and you all know who, you know, that there's rogue farmers about. So what is going to be done going forward to ensure that penalties are applied equally and fairly to everyone and to every farmer across the board? And it's not really the farmer that's seeking to comply all the time that's getting the penalty fixed on them, while the other rogue farmer, if you want to put it, gets away with it, and the penalty's not put to them. So what's going to be done going forward to address this particular issue?
Yeah. The penalty matrix will be applied uniformly wherever we find breaches of those standards. Again, we, as I said earlier, we do want to try and our level best to help farmers comply with the standards. But if a farmer does not, they're at a higher risk of being a much higher risk of being inspected in the future. And if the breach continues, they will escalate through the penalty regime, with the penalty doubling each year. If there are very severe breaches of the standards sufficient to warrant prosecution, that's also a tool open to us for those cases.
I suppose the difficulty with that on a number of cases is the fact that it's getting evidence then to put to the courts. And I mean, we've seen it before where the department has failed in this.
Yes, and certainly part of the intention that we have around our hardware and software procurement is geared towards better evidence gathering at the point of inspection. So acknowledge that there have been cases in the past where courts have found that hasn't been of a sufficient standard. We want to try and address that through the way that we would conduct inspections in the future, to ensure that we capture evidence at the point of inspection whilst it's there.
Yeah, it's just to ensure that the farmer that's living by the book, seeking to meet all the criteria and regulations that's laid down, that they're not being continually penalised when these other folk get away with it.
Yeah, and that is, I do take the point, and we have heard that over a number of years, and certainly I want to assure the committee we're doing our level best within the resources that we have to be able to try and deal with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Anya?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jason, for your presentation. Just a quick supplementary off the back of Tom's query in and around hardware procurement. Would there be any way at the minute in, I suppose, retrofitting the existing or software systems that are in place rather than going down the road of procuring new hardware?
The software systems that we have are approaching end of life. They're operating on quite old technology now, so we do want to be able to make an investment that will see us through the next number of years using better technology with more robust hardware. So we are in a position where whether we have this change in policy or not, we're going to have to replace the hardware and software.
And I know that you had set out that will be taking place over the next number of months, regardless of what happens with this. Is there any indicative times in around tendering yet, or just to suppose how advanced are those conversations?
Not yet. I expect our procurement will be limited to hardware. The software is designed and within the department, so we've got a bit of resilience around that in terms of we have developers looking at this right now.
And I suppose even drawing comparisons with the new NIFA system, I think that was the issue for the department at the time, where they had to go out of house for both software and hardware. But look, thank you very much for that, Jason. Just in relation to the farm sustainability standards, the draft copy in Annex B, it states, and I suppose it's more of a technical point, that farmers will have to comply with some BFC legislation under the Protection of Landscape, Archaeological and Heritage Features. How would DFC, or I suppose how, in terms of enforcement powers, how would DFC go about enforcing, I suppose, any breaches or identifying any breaches in that regard?
We would, if we were to detect breaches, and with DFC it's really around scheduled monuments that happen to be in farmland. So if we were to detect a breach where there's been damage or destruction of such a monument, we would notify DFC. And
then I'm assuming at that stage the ball would be in DFC's court?
Yes, as far as prosecution is concerned, I believe, yes, but we would if it's appropriate and it breaches our standards, we would apply a penalty as well.
So in that case, Jason, keep me right here, there would be two, there could be a possibility of only one penalty in that case, or two penalties, one from DFC, one from DERA?
There'd be a penalty from DERA, but there could be a prosecution by DFC depending on the nature of the case, as there would be in certain water pollution incidents where we would apply the current cross compliance penalty, but prosecute through the courts where there may be a fine as well. So it's no different.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Just before a minute in, I'm going to bring William in and just going to wrap it up, but I have just a couple of quick fire questions if you don't mind. These are more in relation to a concern that has been shared in the committee in terms of vacancies in the department and the ability to retain knowledgeable senior responsible owners for a project of this scale. Are you content with the team that you have? That you have the requisite amount in your team to deliver this on time at pace, and also with that level of knowledge and relationship too? Because I know that there's a churn right across all of the departments. It's not unique to Sierra. Yes, I am. We have been prioritising this work certainly within my own division. So I have a team dedicated to this, and I'm content with our arrangements there. We're not invulnerable from change, but as we said at the moment, I think we have enough people to do the job. Okay. Listen, I have a few other questions, but I'm not going to use them now because at least this is an early briefing and I do appreciate it. William, you just one point you wanted to make, I think, or one question.
Tom here touched on that. I was just going to say, Jason said earlier that they want to have farmers meet farm sustainability standards and how that's going to be done. I think it's important that even inspectors, if they call on the farm, that they can give advice to farms, that they just don't go out, not the bucket farmers, but they can get, in mild situations, they can give them advice how to stop that. Yes. I think Mr. Blair talked about deliberate polluters. None of us have any time for deliberate polluters.
Agreed. Yep. Agreed.
None of us have any time for that. But there will be those farms that you go into a bit of dirty water, runoff or something. I think it's important that advice is given to farmers. How do you propose to do that in a meaningful way? Well, that's something we're going to work through in more detail with colleagues in NIA and others. But I think in general terms, what we want to see is where a breach is detected, even if that results in a penalty, we still need to be able to point out and communicate clearly with the farmer at the point of inspection or in a subsequent letter precisely what the problem is and advising the farmer on how they could put that right. For us, it was reflecting on a question asked earlier around the success of this. I'd be particularly interested to see and keen to see fewer repeat breaches as well, where we are able to show that there has been a breach, penalty applied, but the farmer has, with our advice and support, been able to put it right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. That's important. It's like when you get that letter from the student people through the post and you say, do you want to do it? Not that I have one, or 2 or 3, but do you want to do a course, or do you want the points to do the course? So that's really useful. Thank you. Members content then to move on? Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. Agenda item 6 is SL1, Farm Sustainability Payment to Farmer Amendment Regulations. Sorry.
It's just really on
1 second, Michelle.
It wasn't a question, it was really just a follow-up really from the committee as to whether or not we were then going to have any briefings from the likes of the UFU with regards to the impact of the proposed scheme. Yeah, no, good point.
Members, there is a bit of... It's not that we don't have a lot of time on this, but we do have a window here in terms of what our role will be to support the Minister of the Department in terms of ensuring that what comes through in 2026 meets the needs of all the stakeholders here. So are you content that we return to this and open up the discussion about getting stakeholder moving into speaking to stakeholders and that type of thing, particularly in regard to the stuff that still has to be drawn up? I think the question that I raised about the space that's available for stacking and on small farms and that type of stuff, to inform rather than critique, because the consultation, you're not opening up for consultation wider than where you've got to at this stage, isn't that right? So this is about assisting I suppose, in the space of the policy development regulation. Are you content? Members content?
Yep.
Any objections?
We could develop. We could have space for more discussion on this maybe next week.
We could put it into the forward work plan as a matter of discussion, and then we can get the points in that as to what you want to do with it.
It was just, very straightforward in having a briefing session from the stakeholders, just so that we can get a sense of what this is going to be like from those who are actually going to then be affected directly.
Okay.
Members content to use the list that we had previously then? Yeah.
Just the Ulster Farm Machine.
I think it's the
Very chair.
members of the members of the stakeholder group.
I hope there's no frustration that I might want to go wider than one body.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be almost inconceivable if that frustrated anybody. And if I heard the proposal right, Chair, I'm going by your words there, to make it clear, not anybody else's. And I couldn't hear every word that was said. Can I ask for clarification around with whom we will be consulting, if there's going to be further consultation?
I would. My own preference would be to consult as wide as the department consulted.
Okay.
If members are content with that, I don't think we can refine or define it any further. Not.
I mean, I'm happy that others are obviously brought up and just have a discussion in relation to it. I just don't feel it's maybe necessary for us to have the APSG as a body in its own right, because that's obviously the group that's been discussed at the department meeting with. And they recognise that group. I suppose more concerned about meetings with individual groups to get their particular view.
Have you any wider than the group that's been identified? Do you mean if there's anybody in particular?
Well, no, but all I'm saying is that we speak to the groups individually as opposed to this.
Oh no, that's the point I was getting. And to be fair, that's what we did initially. We contacted them individually to ask them for their position in this, and that's on the other, which is it's kind of tied to the same piece of work, albeit one's payment and one's regulation. That's the same methodology we took with previously. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Or we could just simply request a briefing from the agri sector and one from the environmental sector, which might be another way to do it.
I mean, I personally, I think those that have been consulted, as we rolled out last 2 weeks ago, they're already been identified, and it means that nobody can come back to the committee and say that they weren't given the opportunity again. Would that be better rather than someone come back and critiquing us? And they can turn it down. They can say that they're content with how they've been represented by the stakeholder group. Is that okay? Thank you, guys. Okay. Agenda item 6. Thank you. Is the SL1 Farm Sustainability Payment to Farmers Amendment Regulations 2025? Refer members to pages 10 to 16 of the tabled papers for the SL1. As briefing papers from the Department on the Farm Sustainability Payments to Farmers Amendment Regulations 2025. Do you need a cushion? That's agenda item 6 in the pack, and it's entitled the Direct Payment to Farmers Amendment Regulations 2025. However, the title of the statutory rule has since been changed. Members of the Department now intends to make a statutory rule under powers conferred on it by sections 4853A and paragraph 5 of Schedule 6 of the Agricultural Act 2020. The proposed SR is to make a number of minor legislative amendments. The closing date for the transfer of payment entitlements, removing the methodology as prescribed by the EU to assess the robustness of the land parcel identification system, and those listed as a competent control authority for cost compliance has been updated to reflect that DERA now undertakes this role. The SR will be led before the Assembly under the negative resolution procedure and subject to executive approval. It's anticipated it will come into operation on March the 6th, 2025. So thank you, Jason, for staying with us. And we also have Ms. Aubrey Anderson Audrey Henderson, Grade 7 Area-Based Schemes Operation Policy Branch at DERA. So if you would like to give us your briefing, we much appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to brief the committee this morning on these regulations, which, as you said, are made under the negative resolution procedure. The regulations make three minor technical changes. Firstly, Regulation 2 simplifies the existing regulations concerning the quality assessment framework, which we apply to our land parcel identification system. So this is the mapping system that we use to determine which fields are being claimed for payment, the field boundaries and the eligible areas within each field. The current regulations contain, as a legacy from the EU, contain a lot of very specific detail on how this assessment must be carried out. This no longer fits with our current schemes and our reformed land eligibility rules, and therefore we intend to simplify the requirements whilst retaining the overall requirement to annually assess the accuracy of our mapping system. Secondly, then, Regulations 3 and 5 bring about the same amendment to transfer responsibility as Competent Control Authority from the former Department of the Environment and the Health and Safety Executive to the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. This brings the regulations up to date with existing practice. Thirdly, then, Regulation 4 extends the deadline for applications to transfer payment entitlements from the 2nd of May to 15th of May to align it with the deadline for single applications. Although we did not undertake a formal consultation on this change, we have discussed it with the Ulster Farmers Union and the Agricultural Consultants Association, and both organisations are fully in favour of this change. Just like to apologise to the committee for some drafting issues in the statutory rule before you, which have been corrected for the final version to be made. These relate to the dates inserted for validation purposes and one word which was omitted incorrectly. It doesn't change the meaning of the regulations or the amendments in any way. So those are the, in summary, those are the three minor technical changes to the regulations that bring them into line with current and future policy, and Audrey and I would be happy to answer any questions the committee might have.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you so much. I've just got one question. The briefing does state that removing the methodology to assess the robustness of the land parcel identification system will enable DERA to adopt a more meaningful methodology to reflect the delivery of the new scheme. Is that methodology currently under development? And if so, is there anything more you can tell us about it?
Yeah. Our intention is from 2026 then to make all agricultural land eligible for payment except for hard features. The methodology as prescribed in current regulation doesn't fit with that, so it requires us to identify and measure ineligible vegetation, which won't be ineligible in the future, so we're changing the regulation to align it with a simpler set of rules around land eligibility, and that's what that regulation does. But as I said, Chair, it does still require us to undertake that annual assessment of the accuracy of the system.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Declan?
Thank you. Jason, I note and welcome the fact that the industry has welcomed the extending of the transfer window. Just sort of out of curiosity from the department's point of view, will you see if transfers come in very close to the 15th? Will the department be able to turn that around in time so that farmers aren't penalised for late submission of their single application forms?
Yes, the transfer of entitlements and the single applications are separate, so there is no penalty for late applications for transfer of entitlements. They just can't be accepted in law after the date. But for the last number of years, we have had an online transfer system which has accounted for at least 97% of all transaction volumes going through the department, and those are done very simply by farmers or auctioneers and agents. And that can be that system is available and will be available right up to midnight on the 15th.
So, say if a farmer wanted to activate those entitlements in the same year as they transferred, will that be still?
Yes.
Even if it's very close to the deadline?
Yes, they will.
Okay. And just a pure, I remember, I think in the past the Lippis had around 750,000 land parcels across the north. What is that still?
Yes, it is.
750,000 land parcels.
Yes, around as far as what is claimed for payment is around 936,000 hectares. But we have other land parcels in there as well to make sure that we're preventing farmers claiming land that isn't in agricultural use. So there is probably around 1 million hectares all told in the system.
No problem. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Patsy?
Thanks very much. Just maybe an early question, this, but how is that done? Is there satellite involvement with that? And the second part of that is, do you liaise then with the LPS as well around land ownership?
No, we don't on land ownership because land is not a requirement of our schemes for land to be owned. Yeah. So who owns the land isn't really a factor for us. We do work quite closely with LPS around the mapping technology that we use, and they gather the orthophotography for us. So we refresh the Lippis, a third of Northern Ireland every year, just with a sophisticated digital camera on an airplane. We also supplement that with satellite photography as well. And so what we do with the quality assessment is take a sample of fields and check them to see how they're accurate. And there's a sophisticated piece of software that we use to do that assessment. It is performed for us by AFBI. So the department, we're not marking our own homework, but we do require a bit of technical expertise, which AFBI have, to enable them to do the assessment for us and give us a result back each year.
That's well, thanks very much.
Good question. That's it. What are you thinking? William?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In a recent meeting, we were informed that there would be possibly a large number, maybe 4,000, will be deemed as inactive farms. They will have to settle their entitlements or move their entitlements before the 2026 scheme year. I have concerns that those people, this new land coming in, of course, but it could be difficult for those people to settle their entitlements in time. For transfer entitlements, they have a very short window to do it.
Well, they have the opportunity at quite an early stage to transfer their entitlements if they wish, like any other farm business. What we're doing is extending that by a further 2 weeks. But we, for example, this year we're going to launch the single application and the entitlement transfer service together on Monday the 3rd of March is our intention. So farmers do have 10 weeks or so to make those transfer applications online, but arrangements can be made through auctioneers significantly in advance of that. This is just the facility to put through the transaction. They can have arrangements made or through auctioneers or agents to transfer their entitlements long before that. And our intention is to write out to those businesses as early as we can to afford them the maximum amount of time available to be able to make whatever arrangements they see as a farm business.
I suspect that some of those farms want to appeal the decision of the department. That they'll claim they're still active and usually making a decision they're not active.
Well, we're making a decision that they're not entitled to entry to the farm sustainability payment based on historic information from, I think it was 2020 and 2021. That's on the basis of factual information. They have no crops, for example, declared on the single application, and they've got no animals at all in their business. So it's really on a very factual basis. Now, it is not beyond the realms of possibility that there's some error in a change in the way a business was structured at a given time. If a business thinks that we have made that determination on the basis of incorrect information, they're absolutely, we have plans for a rapid review of those cases rather than having to go through the full review decision process.
Yes, I suspect there will be those that want to contest that.
They would.
Not.
Yeah, I suppose it'll be interesting to see on what basis that those challenges might be made, but we do have plans to deal with them if they arise.
Okay.
Brilliant. Are there any other further questions on this matter? No. No. Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation, and just thank you for your attendance. And members agreed that the department proceeds to make the SR, and then we will then consider it and the ESR report formally in due course. Ms. Kennett, thank you very much. Okay. Members, we're going to take a very, very focused 2 to 3 minute break, if that's okay, and then we're coming back because we have a meaty agenda to keep up on, so please do come back within 2 to 3 minutes. Members, I'm going to now request that we consider agenda item 8 as listed in the pack before taking agenda item 7 in order to complete the statutory rules part of the meeting before we take the briefing from RSPB. And then we're going to be able to enjoy watching some nature here with the RSPB officials. So agenda item 8 is the Farm Sustainability Transitional Provision Regulations in Northern Ireland 2025. Members, I refer you to a number of papers for this agenda item, pages 145 to 163 of the pack for the revised draft SR, the Farm Sustainability Transitional Provision Regulations Northern Ireland 2025 as revised. Pages 18 to 20 of the table papers for the note of the informal meeting with the Minister held on Monday, attended by myself and the Deputy Chair. Pages 23 to 29 of the table papers for the detailed follow-up letter from the Minister from that informal meeting. Page 162 of the pack of correspondence dated the 7th of February from the Northern Ireland Environment Link, which states that they are in support of the SR and have nothing further to add in the correspondence we received last week from the APSG. And finally, pages 21 to 22 of the table papers for the email circulated on Tuesday morning by the clerk confirming that the Minister was not moving the motion on the 11th of February and detailing relevant procedural advice from the clerk assistant. For the record, I'm going to run through the history of our consideration of these matters. We were briefed on this draft SR by dear officials at our meeting on the 30th of January when we heard that the draft SR updates the draft regulations discussed with the committee on the 23rd of May 2024. The Department advised that the updates reflect policy decisions since then, taking on board some of the views of the committee at the time and also now the Sustainable Agricultural Programme, the SAP, so the draft SR includes more than was included in the briefing on May 23rd. At the meeting in May, the committee received an oral briefing which included referring to the Farm Sustainability Transition Payment, FSTP, replacing the current Basic Payment Scheme, BPS, and being intended to provide a smooth transition from BPS to the implementation of the Farm Sustainability Payment FSP in 2026. The committee heard that the FSTP required farm businesses to declare a minimum of 5 hectares of eligible land. This was of concern to members around the impact on around 1,400 small farm businesses of 3 hectares and under and their geographical spread. This is a matter that has now been satisfactorily concluded. At the meeting on the 30th of January, we agreed to write to stakeholders listed on the APSG, giving them the opportunity to provide a response to the committee with their views on the draft SR with the offer of giving an oral briefing to the committee. The letters were issued and 4 responses have been received from groups that are part of the APSG stating that they are in support of the SR. The committee also considered the overarching responses from the APSG dated the 4th of February confirming that all its member groups support the draft affirmative SR. Members, at our meeting last week on the 6th of February, the majority of the committee agreed to write to the Minister to request that he did not move the motion on the 11th of February as we didn't have the revised SR. The majority of the committee also agreed to write to the Minister calling for the continuation of the Young Farmers Payment and Regional Reserve until the Farming for Generation scheme is introduced. All members agreed to write to the Minister to obtain full details of the progress of the development of the Farming for Generation scheme, including details of the scheme, milestones of development dates and timelines. Members, on Monday the 10th of February, myself and the Deputy Chair then met with the Minister to discuss the committee's concerns and request that he would not move the motion on Tuesday. The main points discussed are covered in the note of that meeting and the Minister's follow-up letter that I referred to in the list of papers for this item. We also requested a further departmental oral briefing today to assist in allaying any concerns, but due to the main official not being available, we have the Minister's follow-up letter. In it, the Minister has covered the rationale for planning to close the Young Farmers Payment and Regional Reserve, and this was discussed at the informal meeting on Monday. These are legacy schemes, and currently business case cover is in place for them to the end of 2025. Scheme to support transition to the replacement schemes. The Minister stated that their continuation is extremely difficult to justify beyond 2025 on a value for money basis. The policy intent of the YFP scheme and the regional reserve was to increase the numbers of young farmers in the industry who were head of holding. However, data from the Farm Structure Survey shows that in 2010, prior to the YFP scheme introduction, 53% of farm managers in NI were 55 years or over, and 22% were 44 years or younger. By 2023, farm managers over 55 years had increased to 58%, while those under 44 years had remained static at 22%. So his interpretation is that the schemes have made no difference to the age structure of the head of holding in NI farms and have not delivered generational renewal. Members, the Examiner of Statutory Rules has confirmed yesterday to the clerk that she will include these draft regulations in her next issued report on Friday, the 14th of February. However, given that we had to consider them today and that the debate is on Tuesday, she has prioritised these draft regulations laid on the 7th of February and confirms for us that they are not required to be drawn to the special attention of the Assembly under Standing Order 43.6. Members, do you have any further comments to make on the Minister's letter or any other matter in relation to this draft ASR at this point? Declan?
Yeah, Chair. I think really what's happened is there's been no change. There's been no change from the SL1 was introduced to the committee, and the meetings we've had and the conversations we've had have been unchanged. Obviously, I think it's important that we, certainly on behalf of our party, want to raise their serious concern that we're being asked to support the removal of an important support scheme without any clarity or timeline on the replacement of what's going to replace it, which is the Farming for Generations scheme. The issue, one of the issues that we have as well, is that there's potential of removing the new entrants and the options for entitlements regional reserve. That this will disadvantage new people who are new into farming. If you're a young farmer in a family, you may have the option to inherit entitlements from your father or your grandfather or grandmother or whatever. But if you're brand new to it, then this will take away that option. And I think moving forward, and we just heard from Jason Foy here, there's 930,000 hectares claimed in the north, so there's obviously 930,000 entitlements across the north. So if we move forward and there's no regional reserve and no new entitlements coming forward, and if by through natural course of things, entitlements that are currently there start to expire, so will we reach a situation where we have 930,000 hectares in the north, but not 930,000 single farm payment entitlements? So how do you farm then if you don't have, there's not enough entitlements to match the amount of land there is? So I just think that it's regrettable that we haven't seen any change to this, despite the concerns that have been flagged up.
Yeah, and to be fair, you were at pains to point that out in the meeting with the Minister the other day in regards to that. Any other comments, Michelle?
Yeah, obviously I'd raised the issue just in relation to the young farmers, and I was concerned with regards to that. I'm also concerned the fact that I'd asked that the Young Farmers Clubs of Ulster come up actually for us to have a conversation with them, and given the fact we've had a couple of weeks, that hasn't actually happened. I do think that there hasn't been the same amount of consultation with that particular group from the department either. My understanding has been quite some time since the department officials met them directly, and I suppose everything now is now being filtered through this other group that's been put together. Declan's right, there hasn't been any change, despite the fact that there have been concerns raised in excess of 2 weeks now. So the other thing I would be keen to find out from the department is with regards to this sort of cliff edge now that we're being told that there is, that if we don't agree to these regulations, that farmers won't then get paid. So I'd like some clarity with regards to what the implications are if these regulations aren't agreed to.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether we can get that before the end of today, before the end of this committee meeting, or it might be something that might need to be sent around members before the end of the week.
I think that's probably a more achievable.
I'd just like to know the implications, because I do feel that we're being rushed into a lot of this, and and once we agree to this, then that then starts the train running, and we have a lot of other regs that are going to be coming in which are associated directly to this. So there's a big responsibility on us with regards to this.
Right. There's no doubt there's a big responsibility in this one because, as Declan has pointed out too, it's closed for new entrants basically because it's just the same as buying a licence. And there was another thing that you raised with the Minister was the value of those entitlements being dictated by the holder, really, too, which could be a further barrier to new entrants. But the Minister was at pains to point out that a big part of the work that he's done in this is for that regeneration and renewal, which absolutely is, I have no doubt, is a big priority for him. So, Declan?
Yeah, Chair, I should have said there, that was a point that I highlighted to the Minister, that if new entrants are not able to get new entitlements from the regional reserve, they have to then get them with a lot of farmers, but there's no uniform rate to entitlements. They vary wildly across. And I should say, I just want to reiterate our position is that we believe that the Young Farmers Scheme, the Regional Reserve and the option for new entitlements should continue at least until we see the shape of what's going to replace it.
Yeah, I think it's... well, obviously the committee can take a busy... Just John first.
Chair, yeah. A couple of points. Firstly, I understand Declan's point. He's raised it consistently. I see it slightly differently, given that my pack shows me there are value for money issues around what he's raising, clear value for money issues. And also, separately, my pack tells me that there have only been 5 people per year generally availing of that opportunity in comparison to, according to the pack, 120 who applied for the pilot scheme on the Farming for Generation scheme. Now there's major disparity there in terms of levels of interest, and I would assume that would translate to uptake as well. So I'm not content to delay further on something that's already been clarified and presented to us in a number of notes here, but most specifically in the pack that serves this committee. Secondly, there appears to be another issue that's arisen. Now I'll need to hear it read out and how it's going to be recorded if we're going to proceed on that, because I'm concerned that we're finding new issues every time this comes to us, even though there have been a number of opportunities in recent weeks to relay those to the department and have them. Could
you be more explicit what that new issue is, do you believe to be, John?
I don't know. I thought there was one being discussed there, and that's why I'm asking for clarification. If there is another addition on which there's clarification being sought, I want to hear that out. If not, that's fine.
Yeah, I'm not sure that there is, but to be fair, I think that the committee at any stage, as evidence arises, and if it comes to a member, it would be incumbent upon them to raise it before something's made. I think
as long as I know what it is before
If the regulations are not agreed, what is the impact on farmers' payments?
Oh, is that the yeah? So yes, that's the piece. Yeah, okay. So in the briefings, and certainly what's been alluded to is that the time pressure for getting this done is that there could be a delay then in the payments and the raft of payments that subsequently come behind that. And I don't think it's a new question. I think it's something that has driven this. It has actually given the energy to. It's what the evidence that the department have given to us or the minister in terms of the need to do it in this time frame. William, you'd indicate.
There's also an issue of those 4,000 farmers that are going to be deemed to be inactive. There's going to be a very short window for those to transfer their entitlements, so there's going to be a lot of entitlements around next spring, not this year, next year, so I do think it will create an issue, and there will definitely be those that will want to challenge the fact that they're inactive. I would have thought. So it will be an issue.
Okay. There's a point that we will get to in today's debate where I'm going to ask the committee in terms of whether to support the SR, but there's evidently a number of queries and questions that members would like urgent referral to by the department in terms of trying to get that level of detail, because I think that evidently there is some time pressure to this. Whether it's just as serious as alluded to is obviously for the minister and the department to evidence, but I don't think the committee certainly wants to deliberately delay, but at the same time needs some clarity and clarification around a number of items and issues. The first one, I suppose, was Declan's point about and this was raised with the Minister, and the Minister didn't kick it out, by the way, about the continuation of the young farmers so that there was no gap between the two, which I think is reasonable. If our members content that that's a question that we seek clarification on.
Yeah.
And the regional reserve.
Sorry?
The regional reserve.
Yes, in the regional reserve. In what way do you want to put that?
The continuation of the regional reserve
Yeah.
and the young farmer scheme until the new policy kicks in.
Okay. Michelle, you had a point that you wanted clarification on. I did kind of.
Yeah, mine is what the impact is of us not agreeing to this. Today, I suppose maybe isn't just as necessary as obviously whenever it comes to the debate in the chamber. But I think we do need to have that information at hand to know what the consequences of any actions are.
Were there any other queries or questions in regard to what we're seeking from the department in this, the Minister? Are you content, Clerk? You've captured.
Give me 2 seconds,
Yeah.
please,
No,
Chair.
I don't want to rush this
Yes. Well, obviously, John Blair has raised the Valley Fermanagh issues and the number of families planned for the pallet scheme, so he wasn't content to delay further. There's an issue from William about 4,000 farmers deemed to be will be deemed to be inactive, but was there a question there for the department?
The question to me is just there's a very short window for those people to move their entitlement and so on. The department did answer that by saying there's much more land coming into land that was ineligible isn't then going to be eligible, so they thought that there will be time to transfer those entitlements. But I think it is an issue because there will be some challenge to the issue of being inactive. I just don't think it will work as straightforward as the department thinks about it.
Yeah, I suppose the issue is the department taking into consideration a time frame that is going to take for somebody to appeal that, and then if they lose the appeal, then for to transfer entitlements after that.
Yeah, I think
maybe that's the issue.
We'll try and get these answers before Tuesday.
Yeah. So I think we've enough there. So we'll seek those answers. The debate will be on the 18th of February, which is next week. So in terms of, as Chair, I have to obviously reflect the position of the committee in that. So is the committee in a position to support the draft ASR January on the 18th of February? I will reflect the issues discussed at the committee in my speech.
Do we have to have a committee position? Can we not defer until we get that clarification?
That can be recorded in the minutes that you weren't prepared to.
If we get a response, I'm not saying tonight or tomorrow, just over the weekend, is there a possibility of having a committee meeting on Monday?
I couldn't. Chair, I couldn't answer that right this second. Obviously, we're out of the building, and I haven't even got my own Wi-Fi here. But we will, we'll discuss. We'll do our level best if you wish to start, before plenary starts on Monday.
I just think it's hard to make a decision until you get.
No,
it's just reflecting.
It's just really what, Chair. All you're asking the community is decide whether you should support it on behalf of the committee or not. Because I don't think it's necessary. I think certainly in the last mandate and the legislation that was done around, for instance, integrated education bill, the chair, who was in favour, and that was Chris, was able to just say there was a range of views reflected, and the committee didn't come to a position. And then it's allowed. Your point is in the debate. You make your points. But I think to be proactive as a proactive committee, it'd be incumbent on us if we do get the information, if we can come to a position. I'm happy to reflect that, but it's also appropriate for me to say there wasn't a consensus, and then members can speak. Tried to get the information.
We tried to get the information and so on.
I think it's unfortunate that we don't have a representative from the department here, and I understand that obviously conflicts of diary and everything else, but I suppose given the fact that this is an urgent piece of legislation for the department, that someone could have been here at least to have given some kind of direction on the tail end bits of information that's required.
On this, and genuinely to be noted, I do absolutely agree, and did say that it probably would work a whole lot better if someone could come, because it would probably lay out some stuff from a departmental perspective. It would just show something else. But it was made quite plain on the day, because I think the senior official was there, and he just didn't have diary capacity. We asked would there be someone else, and they said they would look at it, but evidently they just couldn't. So the position we're not.
Sorry, can you clarify that again? Just couldn't work, Robbie.
Provide someone to give us an in-person briefing on this today. Now, they already have, to be fair, previously at the very start of this, but given the technical changes, I thought it was a good enough reason to bring someone in.
Chair, I think the key official is out of the country, but that
Yeah,
doesn't answer your question of other
there are other
officials.
people attached to the... William?
The young farmer in the regional reserve, I suspect the department knows more about this than they're telling us. It was a wee bit open to abuse, the regional reserve.
Chair, we might need to be careful around some of that terminology, to be quite frank, and to be clear, some of us may not have needed another briefing, so it should not be reflected that all of us would have.
And to go back to John's point is absolutely right too.
I've heard before, and I'm aware of the stakeholder group position as well, which has been stated to me, quite frankly, a number of times, and discussed here also. So I don't think I would have needed any further clarification on any of that, and I think my views therefore should be reflected as well.
Okay, we have a letter that we've agreed on, a series of questions that we will seek an urgent response to, and then if members are minded and if it's useful, I'm more than happy to give in a brief one-item agenda meeting if there's a need on Monday. If your members are minded to, dependent on, so if over the weekend you would remain just vigilant in terms of communication coming through, we'll fire something out in that sake. Do you want to have a meeting off the back of it? I'll make myself available, and I'm sure you guys will. As long as there's a mechanism, Chair, if any of us can't attend that, can't attend that meeting, that there would be some email clarification of an agreed position or otherwise, rather than be declared an agreed position when someone who may not have agreed could not be there. 100%. Are members content? Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Okay, we're going to move now back to agenda item 7, and that's a briefing from RSPB Northern Ireland, update on their current issues. So I'm going to refer members to pages 143 of the pack for this item, and refer you also to a draft press release on our meeting here today that members received via email. And could I just ask, are members content with the draft press release? Yeah. Welcome when you show up to the door.
Michael's gone.
Yeah. Thanks for that, guys. That was useful. Okay, I'm going to just welcome the following representatives from RSPB Northern Ireland to brief the committee. And then we'll take some questions from members after the meeting. We have Ms Joanne Sherwood, the Director, Ms Michelle Hill, Head of Nature Policy and Casework, and Ms Anne-Marie McDevitt, Head of Species. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for allowing us to use your wonderful premises here. We're really looking forward to your briefing. Okay, just whenever you're comfortable, you can...
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So, you're all right there, Anne? Yeah. Okay. Make sure everybody's settled. You're going to be calling in under.
Please don't trip over this.
Yeah. So, hello everybody. My name is Joanne Sherwood and I'm the Director of RSPB NI, and you're all very welcome here to Window and Wildlife, which is one of our 11 nature reserves here in Northern Ireland. Now, you may be surprised to know that here in the heart of Belfast there's more than 100 species, can be found just right outside the window, from lapwings to terns to curlew to gulls and godwits to conic ponies. I'm not sure if you've seen those today yet, and rabbits. And recently, and it's still here, I've checked, we had an avocet arrive, and that's a really rare and exciting occurrence in Belfast. and it's also the emblem of the RSPB, and you'll see it in our logo. So it is still here. I have to say I haven't seen very much of it because it's hunkering down quite a lot of the time, but you might see it later on. So the RSPB is the UK's largest nature conservation charity, operating locally, including here, where we've been working for nearly 60 years. We're also a lead organisation in the BirdLife International Worldwide Partnership, and we work very closely with Birdwatch Ireland to save birds and their habitats on the island of Ireland. We've got about 1.2 million members across the UK, about 12,500 here in Northern Ireland, and locally we've got 110 staff and 550 volunteers. Now those numbers are slightly different to the briefing that you received, so we've had we take stock annually of our membership, so that's why there's sort of new figures there, and our staff change. Together with partners, we work to protect species and restore habitats at large scale, from our reserves to coastlines, peatlands and farmlands. And we're funded by members and supporters, and we also receive grants from bodies such as DARA, the Lottery and Esme Fairburn for large projects, for example, sort of engaging communities and young people, restoring peatland, species recovery and landscape scale nature conservation. We campaign to protect and inspire a world richer in nature, specifically around agriculture, marine and environmental planning and governance. And in some respects, that's why we're here today, and really delighted to be able to meet you, because we believe this committee has a key role to play in protecting our environment for this generation and the next. So to protect our waterways, for clean air, and to save those key and iconic species such as curlew and puffin, which are the ones that seem to make the press mostly. You may not be aware, but nature is in crisis. 12% of species in the island of Ireland are at risk of extinction, and according to the Natural History Museum, Northern Ireland ranks 12th worst out of 240 countries for biodiversity loss. 12th worst out of 200, so 12th from the bottom for biodiversity loss. And a quarter of our birds are now red listed, which means they're the highest category of conservation concern because they're at risk of extinction. Important decisions are being made and schemes are currently being developed. And those schemes and those decisions can help improve nature's fortune. Most importantly, the Farming with Nature scheme that needs to deliver both for farmers and for nature. And Michelle Hill, who's our Head of Nature Policy, will highlight our top policy priorities in a moment. But first I'm going to hand over to Anne-Marie McDevitt, who's our Head of Species, who'll take you through some operational priorities.
Okay. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. I have worked for RSPB for 23 years now, and as Joanne said, I'm Head of Species. So I just want to take a wee bit of a step back, because some of you will be very familiar with us and others not. Why birds? So when you think about birds, they're in every habitat there is. They're all over the planet, so they're widespread. We tend to have excellent information on them, really good data, and they're at the top of the food chain. So that means that birds are really excellent indicators, as well as us having a moral obligation to protect them. They tell you about the health of the environment. They are the best indicators for that, and they're very sensitive to changes in the environment. So for example, if you've got a thriving population of puffins, then you know straight away that those puffins have a safe place to nest on land, free of rats and ferrets, and there's also plenty of fish in the sea for them to feed on. So that puffin is telling you that the marine environment is in good condition. So our aim as an organisation is to stop extinction of species, as Joanne said. We want to turn around declines in priority species, those that are most in decline, but we also want to keep an eye on our common species and make sure that they remain common. So what we do is we focus on the highest priorities, as you would expect us to do. Every 6 years we produce both a UK and an All-Ireland Birds of Conservation Concern, and that puts birds on a red, amber or green list. And you'll have heard a lot, I'm sure, about those lists, with obviously the red and amber being of the highest conservation concern, and species that are green mean that they're doing okay. We have 100 priority species that RSPB focus on, and that's across the UK, our overseas territories, and we also work in several other countries where we support our BirdLife partners. Of those 100 species, we focus on 28 in Northern Ireland, and they include farmland birds like the curlew, seabirds like the puffin, birds of prey like the hen harrier, and long-distance migrants like the corncrake. But what I want you to really kind of think about here is that virtually all of those 28 species are dependent on the sustainable management of our farmland or our seas. So the species that are most concerned to us are farmland and seabirds. And these farmland species have evolved alongside farming for thousands of years. So we sometimes hear people saying, okay, these species can evolve if farming changes, but they can't. They've evolved for thousands of years. So something like the yellowhammer, a seed-eating farming bird, its very beak, its very intestines are designed to feed on cereal seeds. It can't just switch overnight. So if you hear people saying that, it's just not true. They can't evolve that quickly. And the other thing is that they're dependent on active, environmentally sustainable farming. So this is definitely not about shutting the gate. These birds have evolved alongside the growth of cereals, the growth of hay meadows, and they need active farming. If we shut the farm gate, everything will turn to trees, which are good in their own right, but we lose a lot of species. So if I start with farmland, that is why for us the most important thing is that we want to see a long-term, well-funded, sustainable agriculture programme that needs to deliver for biodiversity, water, soil, air quality and carbon, and we want to see farmers really well rewarded for this. Key parts of it have to be advisory for farmers and monitoring to see if things are working, but these need to be truly co-designed. We're hearing a lot about co-design at the minute, but what we're really feeling is that we're simply being consulted after the fact. We and other NGOs, we've been working on agri-environment schemes for now 25 years, not just in the delivery and monitoring, but also in the design of schemes. 25 years. So another key thing is, alongside agri-environment schemes, is in many cases we need the protected sites as well. And they're there obviously to protect our most important areas for species and habitats. Yet we're 150 pairs of curlew, and the Andrew Hills still has not been designated as an SPA. And work started on that with NIA a couple of years ago. That's still not designated, and that's really, really important for us. We also need dedicated species recovery funding, and a lot of the time this has fallen to the ENGOs. And why we need this is often the policies still don't have what we need to deliver for species, and we also sometimes need to carry out activities the policy will never deliver. Yet it's ENGOs that are applying for funding to plug those gaps. So for example, something like the Curlew Life funding, it's paying for predator control and nest fencing for curlew over and above agri-environment schemes. And that's absolutely essential. And we have to plug that gap until agri-environment schemes can deliver those things. Then when we look at seabirds, that second group then, the most important thing really is the seabird conservation strategy. We're really pleased to have seen that go out for consultation, and that really was a lot more in terms of co-design with the ENGO sector. And it needs to deliver for seabirds by delivering through marine policy, and that's really ensuring that their marine planning, fisheries and marine protected areas are protecting seabirds and their food sources at sea. But we also again need this dedicated funding for protection of them on land. So at the minute we have the seabird colonies on Rathlin, but we have a lot of seabirds called terns that are on small islands, networks of small islands, and these are in the sea locks like Strangford and Carlingford, but all in the freshwater locks of Loch Nay and Loch Erin. And these sites we need to ensure that they don't have invasive species like rats on them. They need to be monitored, the habitat needs to be managed, and we also need to create new habitat because a lot of these smaller islands now are shifting as a result of climate change. So it's about marine policy, but it's also about protecting where these species are nesting. Again, ENGOs are plugging that gap. As you well know, we're funding, we do have match funding from DERA for this, which is great, but we're delivering the Life Raft programme on Rathlin, and that's the eradication of rats and ferrets, but more needs to be done for seabirds. So that's me, finished, and I will now pass you on to Michelle.
Hello folks, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. As Joanne's already said, I'm Michelle Hill. I'm Head of Nature Policy and Casework with RSPB. And as Joanne and Anne-Marie has already shown, the state of nature in Northern Ireland is not particularly good. And as we edge closer to the 2030 deadline to halt biodiversity loss, we need strong political leadership and ambition to meet that and to match that challenge. And that's why we're calling on your help in the following areas to make a positive change for nature. I'm going to talk to you about the need for targets in law for nature's recovery, an independent environmental protection agency, alongside our other priorities on land and at sea, including delivering on 30 by 30, completing the protected sites network, and rolling out a robust farming with nature package and addressing the nature and climate emergency. But first, I want to acknowledge progress that's been made in the publication of Northern Ireland's first Environmental Improvement Plan. That's an important step in the implementation of the Environment Act, and that is welcome. And while that is welcome, the target-setting framework for legally binding targets within the Act sadly does not apply to Northern Ireland due to the Act being written at a time when there is an absence of the Stormont Executive. This means that our Environmental Improvement Plan is missing that legislative footing that would enable its roadmap to deliver for nature and allow for its recovery, and that's really important. So that's why we're calling for targets in law for nature's recovery. We know from our own research that the executive strategies that are not supported by a legal framework frequently fail to create the necessary change. And for example, we did our own analysis a couple of years ago on the Northern Ireland Biodiversity Strategy, which was to run between 2015 and 2020, and that was to positively benefit nature. But we found through our analysis that 35 of government departments failed to actions, so that's quite significant. There's also just been a recent call for evidence regarding the review of environmental governance, and while welcome, it's long overdue. And we remain the only part of the UK and Ireland that doesn't have an independent environmental protection agency. Northern Ireland has historically had unacceptable levels of non-compliance with environmental law, and this has resulted in substantial degradation of our environment and brought with it significant costs, both social and economic. And that's why we're calling for an environmental agency that is independent of government, which provides transparency, oversight and enforcement of laws that are in place to protect our environment and safeguard nature and public health. Turning now to our priorities in land and sea, and while the clock is ticking down to 2030, there does, however, remain opportunity to make the most of what remains of this decade, to stop biodiversity loss and support nature's recovery. And we do welcome the Executive's commitment to support the delivery of 30 by 30 in the recently published Environmental Improvement Plan. And by 30 by 30, that means it refers to a target to protect and have well managed 30% of our land and 30% of our sea for nature by 2030. And as Anne-Marie's mentioned already, those protected areas, they will form the backbone of our 30 by 30, and that's why we're calling for the terrestrial and marine protected sites network to be completed, including for some of the species that you've just mentioned, Anne-Marie. And from the marine environment specifically, the implementation of the seabird conservation strategy will also be critical in assessing the current significant declines in seabird species. And on land, as you've heard already, we believe that agri-environment schemes are a key mechanism to delivering conservation action for priority species and habitats, and therefore the Farming with Nature package will be critically important. We welcome the Minister prioritising the Farming with Nature package, but adequate funding and resourcing must be provided to develop and roll out a robust package. So far, I've been talking to you about the nature emergency, but I also want to briefly highlight the research on climate change and biodiversity, and that has shown that the nature and climate emergencies are inextricably linked. It is therefore essential that we pursue them together in an integrated and joined-up approach, and it's imperative that action on climate change does not increase the threat to nature. They cannot be resolved in isolation or traded off against one another. They're essentially two sides of the one coin, if you like, and this is particularly important in a renewable energy context. As you've just heard, there's much to do within an ever-diminishing time frame, and as we continue to campaign on our priorities, we look forward to working with ministers and MLAs in an urgent and transformative way to match the scale of action required to help save nature. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Really, it was very, very useful. The big picture from at the start, I'm sure others had it too, is like the canary in the mine of the early warning that birds can give us in regards to the environment that they're in. So thank you for that. I'm just going to, if you're content, we'll just fire some questions at you, if that's okay. You talked about the need for a new Agriculture Act and how that could assist the work of the RSPB. It says in the briefing that I've got here on one of the pages, and if you could just explain it a wee bit further, it says the publication of proposals for a new Agriculture Act that would prioritise public money for public goods. So the bit in there, just looking some quantification around or explanation, is what does for public goods actually mean? Could you expand on that piece for me, please?
Yeah, I'm very happy to expand on that. So the easiest way that I think about it is that when you go into a shop, you can buy things for money, and those are not public goods because you can pay for them and you can receive them. So public goods are the things that you don't see traded through shops. So it's things like clean air, clean water, good quality soil. It's all the things that we need to enjoy. Nature is one of them. It's all the things we need to enjoy and actually support, underpin. Things like a really sound economy. A good, healthy society. So that's the easiest way I find to think about it. If you can buy it in a shop, it's private goods. If you can't, but they're essential, then it's public goods.
Thank you. I have you raised the matter of the establishment of an independent environmental protection agency, independent of government, and that's something that there's been a variety of opinions debated in the chamber. Is there anything that you could point to that would show the gaps that are there at the moment from the bodies that already exist? And there's a number of them, obviously, across the piece that the department have, that where the obvious gaps are that need to be closed. And do you feel that they're currently not independent of government or the department?
Yeah, so I can start and point to a number of gaps, and then I'll bring in colleagues. So I think that when you're part of a government department, then you probably are less able. You have to engage in the policy discussions sort of behind the doors, so to speak. So in terms of then being able to produce evidence that would feed into the overall department way of working, so there is a gap in terms of being able to see things maybe from a number of different angles. So that would be one of the gaps. I don't think our regulation here has been particularly strong, and some of my colleagues may have some statistics to back that up. And I think that an independent environmental protection agency acting independently can make its own decisions about some of those things. It's not subject to that. It would have an independent board. In other jurisdictions, they're set up in different ways. Most are non-governmental departmental bodies, and therefore have some sponsorship arrangement with a lead government department. I think the other question we often get is, well, there's the Office of Environmental Protection that has been recently set up. I'm probably preempting a question there. How is it the same or different to that? And the easiest way, again, I sort of think about this is that an independent environmental protection agency would deal with domestic matters. The role of the Office of Environmental Protection is to hold government departments to account and public bodies to account. So they hold different groups of people to account. As I say, Independent Environmental Protection Agency, totally domestic, looking kind of outside of government. The OEP looks at kind of the systemic ways that public authorities make decisions, and in a way to think about it, it kind of replaces some of the things that the European system would have provided for historically.
Okay, thank you for that.
I don't know whether did you have any statistics about regulations you wanted to?
No, I don't actually. Joanne. Thanks.
That's okay. I'm going to bring members because I do have some indications from members here that want to. So Declan, you're first. That's okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was a very interesting presentation. Thank you very much. Throughout your presentation and on the notes, you made a number of references to the farming with nature, and you quite rightly said that the Minister has prioritised this. What would be the key components that you would like to see in a farming with nature package, which you think would be beneficial in terms of meeting your aims and objectives?
So I think in terms of farming with nature, Anne-Marie has already talked about the fact that we have had a lot of experience through farming with nature over many years. It is that kind of public money for public goods approach, and I think the other thing about it is some of the benefits are making sure that there's targeted advice to farmers during that process. We've worked very successfully in a number of group schemes where there has been that advice on what to do on the ground. I see it as really a partnership approach, and quite often it's peer-to-peer advice as well, farmer to farmer, which works really, really well. I think then there is something about the monitoring of those schemes to make sure that the advice and the work that's being done is really targeted so that the objectives are being delivered, whatever, and those objectives could be across a number of things, but we would be particularly interested in saving the threatened farmland birds that Anne-Marie has spoken about. And then the other thing in the farming with nature is it needs to be long term, it needs to carry on. It has felt a little bit like one scheme is stopping, and we need to, there's going to be a pilot opening and then there's going to be something longer term. But you do need really long term action on these things to keep it going, because as Anne-Marie said, there isn't any evolution. I don't know whether any of my thoughts.
Yeah, just to reinforce, the long term thing is really important, even if you have break clauses in it, because at the minute, the wider scheme closed in 2023, and we don't have any wider scheme. We're waiting to see about the higher scheme, whether it's opening, and there's been gaps in the past. And if you have gaps in it, you lose farmers' confidence, as well. So the long term thing is they're talking about potentially 20 years. And these species have been declining over 20, 30 years. They take that amount of time, and farmers also need that long-term security if they're going to make these big changes that we're talking about. We probably know what options need to be in. There were a lot more options in the old NI countryside management scheme, and a lot of those have dropped off. So you're really talking about, you want things in there that allow farmers to manage all the existing habitat, and then create new habitat, whether that's hedges or riparian zones. And then for seed-eating farming birds, you want wild bird cover. So we know what all those are. But you have to have all the parts. Long term, enough funding. You have to have the monitoring, the advisory. And if one of those things drops off, it just kind of doesn't work. So the gaps have been a real issue for us. But the co-creation is another thing as well. We see, if I'm very frank, we see people in the department changing a lot. So some of the knowledge is gone. And we hear the words co-design, but it's not really co-design. It's, what do you think of this? And really, I think they need to be bringing in NGOs and some farmers as well, people that have experience of delivering it. And I know that maybe they're stuck in terms of they're thinking we need to develop a new scheme, but I think they just need to take the best out of the old schemes. So ourselves and other NGOs have been delivering those landscape scale projects, the group options. So I don't know if you know about those, but like up in Antrim Hills, we're working over about 4,000 hectares there, with about 50 farmers there, and that's we get them into the schemes because our staff are also farm planners. We give them advice, we monitor, and then we say to the farmer, look, you've done this, brilliant, curling have increased, or you need to adapt it in this way. So I think that's the future, but again, they're talking about piloting that, and we're saying, why are you piloting it when we're already, just continue what's there and expand it maybe, but to go back to sort of describing it as a pilot when you've already, put it. So the big thing, I think, is we need to be involved in co-design, and I think we're going to be, saying that very strongly soon, because we're in difficulties if it's described as co-design when it's not, and the scheme doesn't work, our names will be on it. I'm being very frank here, frank.
Yeah. I think that was the point, Chair. I was actually going to ask the question of co-design, because, and looking at the farm with nature, I think the department are looking back over the countryside management scheme and the environmental farming scheme to see what lessons can be learned from there, and obviously consulting with the sector. So I do think, certainly, I would propose that the committee supports that view. The likes of RSPB should be very much involved in the co-design of the farm with nature scheme, which is, I think, hoping to open by the end of this year. Is that correct?
Yeah. 2026. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. And Michelle?
Okay, thank you, and thank you for your presentation. It's really nice to be back here again. I suppose this is maybe a philosophical question, maybe, I don't know, but does the RSPB PB ever feel conflicted in sort of, I suppose, promotion of climate change and also protecting and enhancing biodiversity? And I suppose I'm thinking particularly around some of the mechanisms which are being put into place in order to achieve targets, particularly around renewables and so on too, and wind farms, and obviously the impact that that will have on our wild bird population in particular.
Yeah, I mean, shall I kick off and then I'll bring in Michelle? Yeah. I mean, I think Michelle summed it up when she said it was sort of two sides of the same coin: climate change and nature, depletion. They're both in crisis, and the solutions have to be for both together. So if you go just for technological solutions, those could be at the risk of nature. It's one of the reasons why we were really passionate about getting nature-based solutions into the Climate Act, because that is a way to solve both the nature crisis and the climate solution. So you asked specifically about renewables and potentially wind farms. Michelle will give you a few examples and some detail. They're definitely the right renewable in the right place, I think would be how I would sum it up at a high level. But there are very few times where we wouldn't work with somebody and it's just a total outright no. It would be few and far between. But there are some instances where we would have to draw a line and say, actually, this is just not the right place. But Michelle, over to you. This is your expert topic area.
It's absolutely, Michelle. It's getting that. They're both an emergency, but really we do not want to be contributing to the demise of the other in solving one, and that is a problem when it comes to nature, and particularly with renewables in the wrong place. And I really just want to say we are not anti-renewables by any stretch of the imagination. It certainly is about getting the right renewables in the right place. And very often we make positive comments to those applications but as Joanne has said, there are times when we do have to draw the line. And in the last 10 years, I think we've objected to three, off the top of my head, 3 applications out of 22 wind farms that we've looked at. So it is quite small, but for the species that are impacted, for example, curlew in the Antrim Hills, that when you're down to 150 pairs, and the science, we are an organisation that's based on science. It's not a knee-jerk reaction to something. We look at it with our scientific hats on and say, well, what are the potential impacts here? And for the likes of the Antrim Hills, they could be in important curlew areas. We know that curlew are really struggling at the moment. They're down to around 150 pairs, down from, in the last 30 years, crashed by over around 80%. So it's really imperative that the work that we're doing in the likes of the Antrim Hills and that we're receiving funding from as well, from DAERA, to help save those species, then isn't undermined by the wrong development in the wrong place, particularly when they're hanging in the balance. So yes, it's about, and this is where a strategic spatial approach to the deployment of renewables, and we know that to get to net zero there is going to have to be a rapid deployment, both on land and at sea. It's not just terrestrial, getting the right development in the right place. We need to do that in the marine environment as well. So, but we need to work together. We need to work as a collective, because renewables is good, to get to net zero is excellent, but we need to minimise and eradicate those unintended consequences of getting to net zero on nature and the environment. And that's going to be critical moving forward, because there certainly is an emphasis on climate and climate change, and a feeling that could trump nature, but really they need to be addressed simultaneously moving forward.
Okay, so it's really just on a case-by-case basis that you look at it?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think Michelle makes a really good, I nearly got confused there, but Michelle makes a really good point about that strategic plan. So Northern Ireland doesn't have a land use plan currently. I know there have been various talks over the years about getting towards a land use plan. But just having those discussions in the cold light of day about where are the best places to site some of those things, strategically, I think would be a good thing.
Okay, thank you. And just one more question. It's just really, in the presentation you had mentioned, I suppose, the predator control for curlews and also the eradication of rats and ferrets on Rathlin. And I suppose a general question really around what the approach is to protect ground nesting birds from predators.
Yeah. Do you want to?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, none of us want to do predator control, is the first thing to say, but it's absolutely essential at the minute. Things like curlew, what has happened is when you kind of, everything, lots of things have changed, the landscape has changed and the habitat, so the habitat for them is reduced and it's kind of more fragmented. And then we've also changed the landscape by planting over the years, big conifer blocks. So we have much more, that and they kind of harbour foxes and things. We find that curlew and other species that are nesting on the ground won't nest within a few hundred metres of those. So we've kind of changed the landscape, we've reduced the habitat, and predators have an even greater impact. So what we do need to do is, we used to do habitat management alone, and we were still seeing curlew declining. So we've had to do predator control. It's very targeted.
What does that look like?
So we did research in the 90s and found that the things that were impacting on curlew were foxes and grey crows. We found that they were having, even if you had the habitat right, because of those predators now being at higher levels because of the landscape and the fragmentation, that they were impacting so badly on curlew. Curlew only have to produce one chick to adulthood every second year, and they weren't getting anywhere near that. They need to do that to sustain and increase the population. So unfortunately we've had to engage in predator control, but as I say, it's very targeted to those two species that we did the science on. So we do that, and we also do nest protection fencing as well. So when the eggs and when the curlew have young chicks and have eggs and young chicks, we have an electric fence around them. Now the reason why we need the predator control and the nest fencing is because you can only put the nest fencing around the curlew for a few days, because curlew chicks actually feed themselves. So once they hatch, they will move around to feed, so you can't keep them contained within a fence, and that's why you need the wider predator control, because there's no point in these young chicks being protected for the first few days inside a fence. You remove the fence to let them go out and feed, and then they're taken by a fox, so you need the two. But as a result of we're managing the habitat through agri-environment schemes and the advice, and then we topped up we've been carrying out the predator control and the nest fencing through EU Curlew Life, and that's the first time now in Antrim Hills we've started to see curlew increase in numbers, but not just that, the amount of chicks that they're producing has really, really increased.
And is that, whenever you talk about predator control, is that the removal of the predator?
Yes, yeah. It's humane dispatch of those, yeah. And it's done by contractors that are, have to follow all suite of things.
And is it just foxes?
Just foxes.
Or is it badgers as well?
No, badgers are protected species. We only control.
But is there control of badgers? That's what I'm saying.
No. We don't control badgers. Yeah, and the fences will keep out badgers anyway. The nest protection fences in those early stages, and any other, maybe even sheep can sometimes trod on the nest, so they keep all those things out. No, our focus is.
But the fences will actually then just sort of move them on. Essentially, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, the fences are there. As I said, they protect them at that egg stage and at the young chick stage. As I said, then they tend to roam. The adults and the chicks tend to roam then after that, and that's why you need that wider predator control. Then you're trying to get those chicks to turn into adults, basically. As simple as that.
And you're sort of looking for behavioural change then in and around those areas then from the.
No, you're just looking, really what you want over time is you want to change the landscape so that you have fewer predators. Apparently we have the highest number of foxes in anywhere across Europe. And they think you don't have as much predator control as you used to, but that land use change has really made a big difference. The forestry blocks will hold lots of foxes, and when you remove them, there's nowhere for them to hide then, so that can have an impact.
And the eradication scheme then on Rathlin, what will that look like?
The ferrets have been eradicated now, but we have to wait 2 breeding seasons to just check that we definitely have got rid of those. They were brought on the island by someone to control rabbits. So these islands, as you know, would never have had, they're offshore islands, that's why seabirds are on them, because they never would have had these predators. So the ferrets have been that eradication finished in October, but I think we'll not know until, let me get the years right, 2026, the autumn of 2026, we'll be able to say it's totally clear. The rat eradication, I think, is also almost complete now. And again, we then move into a biosecurity phase. So we were prepared, we monitor then across the island to make sure that there are none. And we also have to do all that work with the boats going across, because biosecurity is huge. You don't want to be spending millions of money and dear money and LHF money to find that they've come back on again. Because as you know, we've had people kind of skating down cliffs, and it's just been massive amount of work. And it's the first ferret eradication in Europe, I think. Or maybe in the world, actually. In the world, yeah. I think it's in the world, yeah.
If I can just say that predator control is always the last resort after you've tried everything else, and the situation is just so desperate. And we do it under very, very strict governance, and it is really well challenged and tested. And we have external advisors who help support us.
And incredibly expensive then too.
It is, and it's not a decision that we take lightly. It's not something that the people who work on it, it's not wouldn't be their favourite part of the job. But actually, we have some evidence from Rathlin when a ferret got down onto the seabirds and just was devastated overnight. Tens of dead birds.
I mean, the two positives about that is if you remove rats and ferrets from Rathlin, you'll be amazed what you see. So those puffins at the bottom of the cliffs, if you go to other Welsh islands, they'll start to expand. We'll have Mike shearwaters, which nest in kind of holes in dry stone walls. They could probably come all over the island. There's a few remaining pairs at the east light. It'll have benefits even for our concrete. So we've got concrete. Lapwing, again, kind of largely gone from the island. So once you remove rats and ferrets, it's going to have a huge number of other benefits. In terms of the curlew, that work is expensive, but you kind of have to remember, over those thousands of hectares, what you're doing is, the good thing is when you give farmers advice on habitat management, a lot of that management is about, taking fields that are chest-high rush and, opening them up more for grazing. So it's good farming practice. It protects the kind of species richness, and those are also carbon soils. So when you manage for curlew, you're actually protecting, it's a flagship really for protecting that land. It's not just, you're not just spending that money on curlew.
Okay. Congratulations on the work that you're doing, actually, and particularly in and around Rathlin.
Yeah, no, Rathlin it'll be amazing. Yeah. It will be amazing, and of course it's done with the community. The community are very excited about it. Having chickens again, for example, but also the impact and what people will see when they visit Rathlin, because it's a big tourist draw as well. So it supports those jobs and a tourist economy on the North Coast.
Thank you very much.
Could I just ask before we bring John in, and Patsy, just in regard to the curlew and lapwing? Declaration of interest. I used to work in McGabby Prison, and there were huge numbers of both at that stage. It was a long time ago. Is that still the case, or do RSPB have any work? I mean, obviously there's no predators.
As far as I know, it's been designated. So it happened years ago that we had an Operation Lapwing, and we put a call out for any farmers of lapwing, and we got a call from McGabry Prison. Yeah. Because they were the original predator fences. I talk about the electric fences, but on our reserves where we can put big permanent predator fences, we can't do that in farms, really, but we can do it. So it was the original predator-proof fence. So it just means then it's only other avian predators, great crows. So I think there's still, I think it's designated now.
It's designated, yeah. For lapwing, and I know that they were doing some habitat management measures some time ago with keeping fallow plots and soil, because they like soil. Anne-Marie can talk to you more about that. But they were actively managing some of the areas within.
The rabbits weren't so healthy, I'll tell you that. It's not so good having those enclosed so close to each other. Yeah. Okay, if you do, just go to then invite John and then Patsy. Thank you.
Chair, thank you. Following on from that previous conversation, given my association with certain private members, Bella should be clear, no difficulty whatsoever with predator control in the interest of biodiversity. Some of us can draw a distinction between protecting biodiversity through predator control as a last resort or otherwise, and ripping wild mammals apart, calling it fun or recreation, and we see that as a complete inconsistency. Sticking with, I suppose, some of those realities, like I can't have this conversation today without acknowledging the fact that we live in a world. I operate in an assembly where there isn't a perfect picture. I do detect degrees, and sometimes quite high degrees of climate denial. I sense that there are politicians in a number of legislatures that have been less than flattering about the environmental sector, quite frankly. And also, there's a political reality, and you will know this, that it took many months to get an environmental improvement plan through the Northern Ireland Executive. And also, the same can be said for the Loch Ness plan, and that is a harsh reality that we operate in. We sit and be nice to each other all day long, but those are realities. They're going to impact on many of the things that you would like to see, and many of the things that I would like to see. However, on a more positive note, I do think the committee has a role to play in trying to foster and nurture better arrangements around that co-design piece, and making sure the involvement of yourselves more often, and other NGOs as well. And also to continue on a positive way, I want to thank you sincerely, not only for the work you do, but for the assistance your work has given me since I became an MLA. Particularly at those times, all too rare times, when there is a functioning assembly and we can ask questions of ministers, and don't please ever underestimate the value of your work to those of us who are trying to pursue some of those important environmental issues. In terms of questions, I'm keen to know, and we're probably back here to the co-design piece and consultation. I've referred before to the ever-evolving marine plan that's been come from RSPB IEA. Can I ask what your involvement has been on that, and if there's ongoing consultation, or whether because that seems to have various stages, to say the least. Have you been involved more than once, or was it simply as a public consultee? I'm really keen to know, and I'm asking that question also in terms of the forthcoming renewed Fisheries Act.
Yeah. So I'll make a start. Michelle might want to come in terms of details of how much we have been involved. We may need to come back to you. But on the marine landscape, we do have some marine expertise. We work largely through the Northern Ireland Marine Task Force that we co-manage with Ulster Wildlife, and that would include, some work with commercial fishers, but also on policy issues. So we would contribute, as I say, largely through that group into any of the processes that are run by the department. Michelle, I don't know if you've got more information about how much we've been involved in that particular piece of work.
I can't, because it's 10 years ago since the consultation. It's one plan that is long overdue, and I know that we definitely did submit a response to that, John, at the time, and I think that there has been some engagement with regards to getting the plan published.
Yes.
But in terms of how much engagement we've actually had on it, we do have a specific officer that deals with that, and I'll need to take that away.
Yeah, I'm keen to know if you have an opportunity. There are a number of situations that change the environmental landscape, pardon the pun, over a period of 10 years, that you might need yourself even to refresh and renew what you submitted previously. And therefore, it makes common sense to me that even separate to the ongoing co-design, that there should be opportunities to consult and input on a more regular basis in such a lengthy process, although the preferred option would be that you be continually involved through co-design. My second question is around, this is a regular one for me, and you're talking about the Alpine Hills, and I'm looking out the window here at the Belfast Hills, and I've some familiarity with both the Cave Hill on the left and work that's been done by the Woodland Trust on the slopes that look towards my constituency, though they're strictly speaking of North Belfast, and then Carnmoney Hill on the right there, which we have some area in my constituency, and I know that some of that is council owned. Woodland Trust work there as well. There's certainly been some council owned land there through the decades, and various plans that have never come to fruition, and I think there are some walks and observation, nature observation posts and things there now done by council and Woodland Trust. Can I ask you, what work do you do with councils, if any, given the amount of parks estate that they have, also their involvement in some areas like Carnmoney Hill there? Is there any organised consultation with them on an ongoing basis?
So if I take the Belfast Hills specifically, and then I'll ask Michelle to talk about engagement with councils more generally. But in the Belfast Hills, the major NGOs that work there are Belfast Hills Partnership, National Trust, Ulster Wildlife, and also Woodland Trust, as you rightly mentioned. If they have some very specific things, they might ask us to come and have a look at something specifically, but we don't manage any land up in the Belfast Hills. Okay. But we do support them with advice if they need it. So that's kind of the specific bit around the Belfast Hills. Do you want to talk more widely about the sort of engagement with local authorities?
Yep, certainly. So obviously, with reform and transfer of local government back in 2015, the planning powers were transferred to them, and also the function of community planning as well. And there's a statutory link between community planning and the LDPs. So over those years, we would engage with the local councils with regards to the LDP, the local development plan. Some councils have published their plan strategy, and we respond to all the consultations that come out on all the local development plans, and certainly we did a bit of a roadshow way back as well, Anne-Marie, around the councils. So we engaged across all 11 councils and all the 11 local development plans. Now that is a huge task because there's me doing that, but it is a really important role to do. Community planning, we've been involved in that, but we've had to move back a little bit because we just don't have the capacity to service that in the same way as we do the LDPs. We have been meeting certainly around Brexit and post-Brexit with the local biodiversity officers as well. Not all councils have a local biodiversity officer. We haven't met now in a number of months, but certainly around concepts and planning concepts and the effect of Brexit on planning and the Environment Act. We did engage with them. We had regular meetings where we were able to share knowledge and intel and move up the information curve, so to speak, on that front. And we're also, do you want to?
Yes, I think, as Michelle said, a big part of it is resource. You know, we focus on agricultural land, but there is an immense amount that can be done on council and government-owned land. I think for us to get engaged in that and provide any advice, we would need to seek funding. We kind of did. We have got some funding for species recovery work from Esme Fairburn Charitable Trust, but we also broached with them this idea of how could we, not just in the urban environment, you know, or peri-urban, but kind of how could we work all better together to manage that land, because it's a really massive opportunity. Massive opportunity. And Michelle, one smaller thing that we're doing at the minute is we're talking to Andrew Minute Nabi Council about guidance on swifts. And we have a meeting this afternoon with them and with Northern Ireland Environment Agency, and that's really about getting the guidance on swifts and potentially in the future looking at whether we want to go down a legislative route to get, you know, swift bricks in the all new builds. I mean, that's an absolute no-brainer. That's one of the species that, out of the 28 that's not, you know, agriculturally focused, but that is a species that you could bring back. You could create nest sites across the whole of, you know, the built environment owned by council and private homes and everything. But yeah, I think we just don't have the resources for everything, but that is a big opportunity.
I fully understand your resource limitations, by the way. I'm probably speaking idealistically in terms of the council's RSPB co-working. I know there's some under the consultations. You be contacted by local people, of course, within those council areas as well. But something I'm happy to have conversations around in the future. And I'm asking simply because I'm very conscious that in my own council area, for example, there are large parts of the council estate parks on the banks of the 3 Mile Water River, on the banks of the 6 Mile Water River, and on the Belfast Lochshore as well, at Hazelbank, and right beside Belfast Lagoon, for example.
And of course there's a biodiversity duty for those local authorities as well, so there is, you know, things within their own.
Something you would need help.
And I think that the biodiversity officers do their very best, but there sometimes can be a lone wolf in a very big system. You know, some of the biodiversity officers in like North Down and Nolling, she works in another part of council, and she seems to be able to bring people together because of the way she works, you know. But they try to do an awful lot, but there's a huge amount that government could do. I mean, frankly, I didn't say the whole, you know, the run for Stormont and species-rich grassland, you know, but you know, that would send out a message to people. That's what you want. If you want people to do that in your ordinary garden, you got to do it. You got to do it at the heart of government, really.
More often, at least, than
but
government
that
state like that.
It's been an aspiration for us. It's not just about the agricultural piece; it's all that other ground. But it's difficult to get the ability to do
and
that.
would feed into the local biodiversity action plans as well, John. Whenever they're consulted on, we would feed into that. And just to go back to the Swifts as well, I know that Antoine Newton Abbey is leading on that, but ideally we'd like to see that rolled out across all councils, you know, so it's making the best use.
The Swift champion thing, isn't that the councils do this?
Yeah, so it's making the best use of the efforts and the work that we do as well, how that can be rolled out at scale, you know, and benefit other areas.
I think I don't want to sort of prolong this conversation because I know there's other questions coming, but I think one of the things that we are doing much more of is working through other partnerships as well, and also trying to provide through other funders, not through ourselves, but sort of grants for small community groups to do things. So Nature Neighbourhoods, we've got 2 of those that are in the Belfast locale where there was grants provided not by ourselves, by someone else. But through following on from the programme that David Attenborough did on Wild Isles, it was sort of a follow-up to that. And we've just started a project working with the GAA for the greening of clubs. And, you know, for what is a relatively low input on our part in terms of a bit of time and expertise, then that can reach more people because it's a huge network of clubs and volunteers. And so I think we're recognising as well that there are lots of partnerships we already have. You know, folks out in the ground who are interested and passionate, and that's been a joy to do some of that.
Thank you. That's it. Thank you, John. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. It's very informative. A lot here and there. But just ask, there's the whole issue of climate change, and you know, I'm observing it, and I know a lot of people I live very close proximity to Loch Ness, so a lot of fishermen, a lot of those who are out wildfowl, contribute a lot to the conservation, are noticing quite significant changes in the birds who are there. More specifically, the birds aren't there now because they're not travelling further south. So have you done any work around that? I'm not going to read. I'll just bring off what I've come across here. The invasive species predator control, I see there with the earlier whole question, and that is, and do you not find magpies would be a bit of an issue too? Because like they're always living off eggs from wee birds as well, so I would suggest they're probably an issue. I know grey crows are incredibly difficult to get in on if shooting is your preferred method of getting rid of them. They're very, very difficult, but I know from experience around about that magpies are going to be an issue too.
Well,
sorry, I'll just one or two other things here. I'll read the chest and then you can tear away.
Good idea.
Okay. Now, the other aspect of it is to the issue, again, entirely your point there about the pilot. Why reinvent the wheel when you have a perfectly good wheel that observes to work? I just don't understand that unless new people coming in that really don't know and haven't learned and don't know what the learned experiences of others, because there are all sorts of things affecting farming. We had the other day about the inheritance tax and the shaking, the uncertainty that creates about investment in the future, and they're left with a legacy of debt and all that sort of stuff. So there are a plethora of issues there, just not climate change or just not what's going on contemporaneously. That's a clear government policy that will have an impact, certainly psychologically among people about how they are likely to invest. And so therefore one-off, one-on, again, entirely your point, one-off, one-on things by government isn't going to do it for them. There has to be a consistent approach there for those that obviously are consistent and an ongoing farmer for nature thing. And then I want to give one final thing. The invasive species. This is my own personal observations. Buzzards, how are they settling in because I know that the conventional spoken terminology, spoken advice around it is they go after cleaning, and I haven't certainly not that. Going after other birds, going after rabbits and all that sort of stuff. So it's interesting to hear how your observations, if you have any, around the introduction of buzzards to the environment, how that's panning out and how that's maybe affecting the control of other animals and other birds, especially if, as I saw them, attacking other birds.
Okay. Do you want to take buzzards and magpie, and I'll take...
Well, I can take short stopping as well. This is
Okay.
the first one.
Yeah, go for it.
So the first one about the loch, yeah, I mean, there was a PhD done on what was happening with the diving ducks on the loch, and the issues where there is, you can't really tell you all the answers, but one of the feelings is because of climate change, normally what happens is when it's colder further north, the birds come to us, and because it's milder now, you're getting short stockings so that they're actually staying closer to home. So that's one of the reasons probably that you are seeing a decline. But obviously too, what we're seeing with water quality is going to produces toxins, it's going to affect the aquatic invertebrates, it's going to move up the food chain. And then you're seeing also, so many things around the loch in terms of, we all know about the water quality issues, but loss of habitat development, continued kind of development around the loch. In terms of magpies, we do the science on it, and I know you can say, it's like when you see magpies in your garden and you think, oh, they're eating small garden birds. There isn't really evidence that they will be seen, absolutely. Some occasionally taking curlew eggs, but when we did the work on them, we found the grey crows and foxes, and we are seeing a response to that. So we have to kind of go on that, and that we only can control things where we find that we have the evidence for it. So I know you might see an odd bird, but they're not having an overall impact is the information there. In terms of buzzards, they're not an introduced species. They are a native species that was once knocked back way down because of persecution and use of illegal chemicals as well. So when they started to ban the use of those chemicals, we started to see an increase in buzzards. So all you're simply saying is buzzards returning to what levels they should be at. Buzzards are of least concern for us in terms of they are carrion feeders, but they absolutely will take rabbits, and they will occasionally take other things, but they're quite a big, slow raptor. They're not built they're not a sparrowhawk, they're not a peregrine, they're not built really to take small birds, it's quite unusual, but they will take carrion, and they definitely will take rabbits, and some other things, but they're a native species, so they're not introduced. It's just because they were almost, persecuted to extinction, really, and then it started to come back. I personally think that's what we're going to see.
All right.
Agreed.
They're lovely to see and lovely to listen to, but when you see them in action, man, it's something different. But then the other issue of the invasive species, what would you call invasive species? I'm speaking from ignorance here.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, there's two kind of things. There's invasive species, things that have never been here. So things like the zebra mussel and mock ern, white cod, crayfish, and all those kinds of things. Those have never been here. They're brought in from other continents. And then you have species that are invasive that are native, but they're still invasive. So rats, the example, rats might be native, but they were never native to Rathlin, so they're invasive because of that. Because all those offshore islands were just too far away from land to have those species on them. So you do have to kind of control them. So that's not too confusing. There's the invasive species that are never been here, and then there's the invasive species. Then there's some native species which can be invasive in some places. But we're talking mostly for invasive species, like the Himalayan balsam, that pink flower that's now kind of everywhere. Some of the things that I mentioned, great squirrel would be a prime example. And then they upset all the balance.
Or they bring in disease. Or they they eat out of house and home the native species, so they outcompete them.
Then the importance then for consistency, not only for support for farming practices.
Yeah. I mean, we would really agree with that, support for consistency of funding for farming practices. And I think, the schemes can always improve. We're always learning all the time. So, we should take from the best, improve the things that need to be improved rather than standing still. One of the things that we have long since called for has been a fair and planned, or a just transition, it sometimes gets called, to more, so that farmers are supported to be more sustainable and farm in a really, really nature-friendly way. And that is kind of optimised in the thinking, so that you get that sort of transition towards a longer term, sustainable way of farming in harmony with nature. And, we think there could be not only funding put towards that, but there could also be, if Treasury set its mind to it, some sort of tax relief on the farms that really commit to doing that. So it's, there are various signals in that, but we really remain totally committed to supporting farmers to produce food, and good quality food in harmony with nature, and we think that that transition is sorely needed, and we've called for that a lot.
Well, that's good to hear. Thanks very much indeed for your time and your information.
Thank you for your presentation and for being so willing to take so many questions. And you can see there's a real interest there from members. It was really informative. And I believe there's an opportunity after we finish.
There is absolutely an opportunity to have a look.
Yeah, have a look and further chat over a sandwich and a cup of tea.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your...
Thank you. It's lovely to see you all. Thank you for your time.
Members, agenda item 9 is correspondence. I refer you to correspondence dated the 7th of February, page 165 of the pack from Mark Durkin MLA, announcing the launch of the public consultation for his private members bill, which is called the Environment and Nature Restoration Bill, which is actually probably very useful given some of the content that we had from RSPB there. We considered advance notification of this last week. Any comments to make on that? Content to note?
No.
Thank you. Members are referred to the 31st report of the Examiner of Statute Rules dated 7th February 2025, pages 166 to 175 of the pack. The report refers to the following SRs of relevance to the committee. Subject to the draft affirmative resolution procedures, draft SR, the waste fees charges amendment regulations Northern Ireland 2025. Subject to negative resolution is the SR 2025-11, the Animals Identification Record Movement and Enforcement Amendment Regulations 2025. The report drew this SR to the attention of the Assembly on the grounds that it was led in breach of the 21-day rule. However, the ESR was content with the Department's explanation for the breach. Do any members have any comments? You content to note?
No.
Members are referred to a series of emails at page 176 to 180 of the pack that the committee has been copied into between Mac Waste Limited and NIA Waste Regulation Unit regarding the Has Waste. I'm back to my fire service days, Hazmat. Has Waste query and Mac Waste seeking clarification, confirmation from the Department that environmental legislation has been followed. Any comments? Or this is a live matter, so I imagine that they're content to note that. Members are referred to correspondence page 31 to 33 of the table of papers dated 11th February from the Department regarding a minor amendment to the agricultural student fees regulations as a consequence of the introduction of the Education Scotland Bill. This amendment does not impact in any way on the interpretation or application of the agricultural student fees regulation. Members, this was a very minor change to DAERA legislation. Minister Muir has informed the Scottish Government Cabinet Secretary for Education and Skills of his agreement in principle to the drafting of Section 104 order, making the consequential amendments to the agriculture student fee regulations. The Section 104 order is a tailor-made Westminster affirmative mechanism to use powers across the UK jurisdictions where Scottish legislation has a cross-border dimension. Members, have you any comments? So you content to note. Thank you. Agenda item 11, forward work plan. Draft forward work programme can be found table papers, pages 35 to 37. On last week's forward work plan, there were 2 SL1s included for the meeting of the 27th February. SL1, the Eel Fishing Amendment Regulations 2025, and the SL1, the Environmental Protection Disposal of Polychlorinated Biphenyls and Other Dangerous Substances Amendment Regulations 2024. Both still require executive approval and will come before us in due course. Any comments? Can we agree the forward work plan as published? Thank you, members. Any other business? Okay, date and time of the next meeting is Tuesday, 20th February 2025 in Parliament Buildings at 10 a.m. The meeting is now adjourned.
Chair, unless we have an extra one.
Unless we have an extra one. We're definitely adjourned.